The world was buzzing with anticipation. At a global conference in Silicon Valley, tech mogul Elon Musk stood before an audience of scientists, researchers, and journalists. This wasn't the usual event where new innovations in space travel or electric vehicles were revealed. Today, Musk had something entirely different to share, something that had the potential to change everything. The screen behind him flickered to life, displaying data from a series of studies, each one more alarming than the last. "This," Elon began, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made the room go silent, "is a fungal disease unlike anything we've encountered before. And it's spreading fast." The room erupted in murmurs, some people exchanging worried glances, others scribbling notes frantically. The buzz quickly turned into an uncomfortable silence. It wasn't the kind of thing people expected to hear from the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla, especially at a conference so focused on technological advancements. The image on the screen shifted, showing footage from wildlife reserves across the globe. Animals, once healthy, were now succumbing to a mysterious affliction. The fungal infection was rapidly decimating entire populations of endangered species. But it wasn't just the animals in the wild that were affected. There were reports of domestic animals, cats, dogs, even farm animals, showing signs of the disease. And what was worse, there was a frightening possibility. The fungus could be mutating, adapting, and crossing into humans. Elon paused, allowing the gravity of the information to settle in. "We don't know where it started, or why it's happening now, but we need to act fast." A journalist near the front raised his hand. "Elon, are you suggesting this could become a global pandemic? What evidence do you have that this could affect humans?" Elon's gaze met the journalist's. He knew this question would come. He had anticipated it, even prepared for it. "The evidence isn't fully clear yet, but we've seen mutations in the fungus that suggest it has the potential to adapt to new environments, including human hosts. We are still studying it, but we can't afford to wait." The room was filled with stunned silence. Elon could feel the weight of the moment when the world would realize just how dire the situation was. There had been outbreaks of strange diseases before, but this felt different. This wasn't just another virus that could be contained. This was something more insidious, something that could potentially ravage ecosystems, food sources, and even human lives. As the room continued to process this unsettling news, Elon shifted the conversation. "We have the technology and the expertise to combat this, but we need global cooperation. This is not just an animal problem. This is a potential threat to humanity." The first few rows of the audience were still recovering from the shock. The questions began to pour in. People wanted to know how the disease was spreading, whether it was airborne, how it was affecting the food chain, and what was being done to stop it. Elon listened patiently, answering each question as best as he could, though he knew that many of the answers were still unknown. The discovery had come to Elon and his team as an unexpected surprise. While working on some unrelated projects in biotechnology, they had stumbled upon data from a wildlife conservation initiative in South America. The reports described an unusual outbreak in a local monkey population, a species that had never been documented to contract fungal diseases before. As the data came in, Elon's team realized that this was no isolated incident. The same symptoms, severe respiratory distress, skin lesions, and fever, were appearing in other animal species across the globe. But the most alarming part of the discovery was something no one had expected. The fungus was adapting, evolving faster than any pathogen anyone had ever seen. Scientists had initially believed that it was a harmless fungal infection confined to certain animal species, but now there was evidence that it was becoming more dangerous by the day. And worse yet, it had the potential to jump species barriers, something that could trigger a global crisis. Elon knew that this wasn't just another ecological anomaly. This was a threat, a real, tangible threat that could rewrite the way humanity understood disease and its relationship with the environment. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the world wasn't ready for this. After the conference, the media buzzed with the news. Headlines spread across newspapers and social media platforms. Elon Musk warns of new fungal disease that could threaten humanity. The tone was equal parts curiosity and fear. Many questioned whether the disease was truly as dangerous as Elon had implied. while others feared that he was downplaying its potential impact. But there was one thing no one could deny. Elon Musk was serious. His usual focus on space exploration and renewable energy had shifted, and now, the fate of life on Earth seemed to rest in the balance. As Elon retreated to his private office later that evening, he found himself lost in thought. The weight of his words at the conference was beginning to settle in. He had always been a man of big ideas, someone who could push the boundaries of what was possible. But this wasn't just another technological breakthrough. This was a problem that could undo decades of progress in conservation, environmental protection, and public health. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen before him, a world map dotted with locations where the disease had been reported. It was spreading like wildfire, and no one was prepared for what came next. The usual systems for tracking diseases like this were outdated, built for viral outbreaks, not something as elusive and complex as a rapidly mutating fungus. Elon's mind raced. What could he do to stop this? What technology, what innovation, could help stop the fungus from spreading further? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was his lead scientist, Dr. Sarah Richardson, holding a tablet in her hands. Elon, we've just received more data from our research partners. It's worse than we thought. Elon sat up straight, his curiosity piqued. How bad is it? Dr. Richardson's face was grim. The disease is evolving in ways we didn't anticipate. We thought it was localized to certain animal species, but now we're seeing evidence that it could be airborne. The mutations are happening faster than we can track them. Elon's stomach tightened. We need to move faster. We need to make this a global priority, and we need to do it now. And with that, the race against time began. What Elon and his team had uncovered was just the beginning of a battle that would not only test the limits of human ingenuity, but also push humanity's understanding of disease, nature, and its own survival to the brink. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk had always been a man of contradictions. A visionary with an unrelenting drive to change the world, he was also someone who thrived in the chaos of the unknown. But unlike most people, Elon didn't shy away from the magnitude of challenges. He embraced them. His ventures in space, electric cars, and renewable energy were not just about making a profit. They were about pushing humanity forward toward a future he believed was possible, even if the world was skeptical. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, Elon had always been an outsider. As a young child, he was fascinated by technology, often retreating into books, absorbing information at an alarming rate. His father, Elon Musk, was a brilliant but distant engineer, while his mother, May, a Canadian-born dietitian and model, provided the stability and encouragement that allowed Elon to pursue his dreams. The combination of his mother's nurturing nature and his father's technical genius created the perfect storm for Elon's intellectual growth. But despite his natural aptitude for science and engineering, Elon wasn't always the popular kid in school. He had a difficult time fitting in with other children, and as a result, he found solace in his projects and ideas rather than in friendships. At the age of 12, he taught himself to code and sold his first video game, a simple arcade-style game called Blaster, to a computer magazine. It was a small triumph, but it marked the beginning of his lifelong journey in tech. However, it wasn't just a love for technology that defined Elon. It was his drive to solve the world's biggest problems. Even as a teenager, he was fixated on understanding how the universe worked and how he could contribute to making it a better place. He would spend hours reading about energy systems, space exploration, and artificial intelligence, immersing himself in topics that most of his peers didn't fully understand. And though he was often teased for his intellectualism and singular focus, Elon didn't mind. In fact, he relished it. The more people doubted him, the harder he worked. After moving to the United States to study at the University of Pennsylvania, Elon's vision started to take shape. He earned degrees in both economics and physics, and though his education provided him with the foundation for his ventures, it was his determination to make a difference that truly set him apart. While many of his peers dreamed of making money through traditional business ventures, Elon dreamed of changing the world. He would go on to co-found Zip2, an online city guide software company, which he eventually sold for nearly $300 million. The real breakthrough came when he founded X.com, which later became PayPal, an online payment company that would revolutionize the way people conducted transactions on the internet. After eBay acquired PayPal for $1.5 billion, Elon found himself a multimillionaire in his 30s, but the money never changed him. Instead, it gave him the resources he needed to pursue even bolder goals. In 2002, Elon founded SpaceX, with the aim of reducing the cost of space travel and eventually colonizing Mars. His vision for electric vehicles came to life with Tesla, and he poured his efforts into revolutionizing the way people thought about energy with SolarCity. But through all these endeavors, one thing had always remained at the core of his mission: the future of humanity. And now, in this moment of crisis with the fungal disease, Elon was once again facing a problem that was bigger than any single project he had ever tackled. The discovery of a disease that could potentially wipe out species and disrupt ecosystems was not just another tech problem. It was an existential threat, and Elon knew that he was the person who had to confront it. His track record of taking on seemingly impossible challenges wasn't because he believed he was infallible. It was because he believed in humanity's ability to overcome the odds, if only they were willing to come together and act. But even Elon, with all his brilliance and accomplishments, wasn't immune to the pressures of facing such a colossal task. His mind raced as he began to digest the magnitude of what he had discovered. The implications of this fungal disease weren't just a scientific curiosity. They were a global crisis waiting to unfold. For years, Elon had been used to being the one with the answers. He was the person everyone turned to when something seemed impossible. Whether it was colonizing Mars or developing sustainable energy solutions, he had led the way. But this time, the stakes were different. This wasn't a technological hurdle. This was about life on Earth itself, and the reality of that weighed heavily on him. The evening after his announcement, as he sat in his office, the reality of the situation seemed to shift before him. For years, he had built rockets that could fly to Mars, cars that ran on electricity, and solar panels that could power entire cities. But this was beyond anything he had ever expected. A rapidly mutating fungal disease, one that could potentially threaten human life, was now on his shoulders. It wasn't the first time Elon had found himself in a difficult position. He had faced near bankruptcy with Tesla and SpaceX, dealt with criticism from all sides, and even struggled with the weight of trying to innovate in industries that were resistant to change. But those challenges had been business-related. This, on the other hand, was a matter of survival. The clock was ticking, and the world wasn't prepared for what was coming. His mind returned to the people he had surrounded himself with, the brilliant scientists, the engineers, the environmentalists. He had always relied on the collective knowledge of the teams around him, and now, more than ever, he would need them to help solve this crisis. As the evening wore on, Elon knew one thing for certain. This was going to be the hardest challenge of his life. The world was watching, and he couldn't afford to fail. The discovery of the fungal disease wasn't just about science. It was about the survival of life itself. He leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of the situation settle in. It was overwhelming, but it was also a call to action. No one else had the ability to bring together the global resources, the technological know-how, and the determination needed to face a challenge like this. He had spent his life building the tools to change the world. Now, he had to prove that they were more than just tools, they were the future. And so, as the world waited for more answers, Elon Musk began his journey into the unknown, armed with the knowledge that his next steps could determine the fate of millions. The days following Elon Musk's announcement were filled with an air of urgency that hung over every news outlet, research institute, and government agency. Headlines screamed in alarm. Mysterious fungal disease threatens global wildlife and humans? The world was reacting, some with fear, some with skepticism, but everyone with curiosity. But while the world scrambled to process this new reality, Elon and his team dove into the heart of the crisis, trying to piece together what little they knew. Elon sat in a private conference room at SpaceX headquarters, surrounded by the world's top biologists, geneticists, and epidemiologists. They were poring over data from wildlife reserves, conservation efforts, and laboratory experiments, anything that could help them understand the fungus that had begun spreading at an unprecedented rate. Dr. Sarah Richardson, a leading mycologist, had been one of the first to notice the unusual patterns of the fungal outbreaks. She had worked with fungi for years, studying how they interacted with various ecosystems, but nothing in her career had prepared her for what she was seeing now. The way this fungus was spreading was unlike any she had ever encountered. It wasn't just affecting animals, it was changing, evolving in ways that didn't make sense. "We've ruled out the possibility of this being a natural mutation," Sarah said, pointing to a map on the large screen. "The data suggests that the fungus is mutating faster than anything we've seen before. It's spreading to new species, adapting to new environments, and it's doing so at an exponential rate." Elon leaned forward, his fingers steepled in front of his face. His mind raced, but he knew that time wasn't on their side. "What do we know about how it spreads? Can it infect humans?" Sarah paused, looking at the projections on the screen. "We're still trying to determine how it could potentially transfer to humans. The initial animal cases seem isolated, but there's evidence that it could be airborne, which changes everything. We're seeing reports of respiratory symptoms in some cases. If it adapts to human lungs, you're saying it could be a pandemic?" Elon interrupted, his voice hard with the weight of the realization. Sarah nodded grimly. "We're not there yet, but it's a possibility. And if it does spread to humans, we won't have the infrastructure to contain it." "Not yet." The room fell into silence. Elon could feel the weight of those words. A pandemic. It was a terrifying thought, and for the first time, he began to understand the true scale of the challenge ahead. This wasn't just a scientific problem. It was a race against time to prevent global chaos. Elon had built his empire by thinking big, by going after the impossible. But this felt different. The odds weren't stacked in his favor, and no amount of innovation or technology could guarantee a solution. "Is there any way to slow it down?" Elon asked, his mind already spinning through the logistics of what needed to be done. "Can we contain it before it gets to humans?" Sarah shook her head. "Containment isn't enough. This thing is mutating in real time. And with the global interconnectedness we have now, it's spreading faster than we can track it. We're dealing with something that is essentially unpredictable." Elon stood up, pacing in the small room, his thoughts racing faster than he could process. A fungus. A rapidly mutating fungus that could potentially bring the world to its knees. He had no time to waste. He needed to act. "We need to create a solution. And fast," Elon said, more to himself than anyone else in the room. "We need to stop the mutation at its source before it spreads beyond control. We can't wait for governments to act, for bureaucracies to catch up. This has to be a global initiative, and we need everyone, every expert in this field, every resource we have, focused on this right now." Dr. Richardson's expression softened, a mix of fear and admiration crossing her face. She knew Elon's drive better than anyone. He wasn't one to sit back and let others handle the crisis. If anyone could lead the charge, it was him. "I'll get our best people on the ground," she said. "We'll need to isolate areas of the world where it's most prevalent. We can start by identifying the strain and looking for patterns in how it spreads." Elon nodded, his mind already racing with plans. But something about the situation gnawed at him. As brilliant as his team was, they were still in the dark. They had no real understanding of the fungus, its origins, its mechanisms, its potential for further mutation. They needed to find answers, and fast. He turned back to the room, his face hardening with determination. "We need to partner with the best universities, biotech firms, the global health organizations, everyone who has the resources and the data to help us. This can't be a one-man show." His phone buzzed on the table, and Elon glanced at the screen. It was a text from his advisor, Larry Page. "We're hearing rumors of this fungal outbreak spreading to domestic animals. People are scared. It could get worse if we don't act quickly." Elon's grip tightened around the phone. If it had already spread to pets and farm animals, it wasn't just a threat to wildlife. It was a threat to the global food supply. People depended on these animals for survival. If the fungus made its way to human populations, especially in densely populated urban areas, the consequences could be catastrophic. "Elon," Dr. Richardson said, her voice breaking through his thoughts, "we've been tracking the cases, But we need more data. We need samples from every outbreak location to understand what we're dealing with. I'll get you what you need, Elon said, already dialing his next call. His mind was a whirlwind of logistics, data collection, research funding, partnerships, and communications with global leaders. This was bigger than anything he had tackled before, but the more he thought about it, the more he knew that he had no choice but to act. As he made the call to rally the forces, his thoughts lingered on the bigger picture. The fungus wasn't just an environmental crisis. It was a challenge to the way humanity viewed itself in relation to the natural world. Elon had always believed that human ingenuity could overcome any obstacle, but now, for the first time, he wondered whether this would be the one that was beyond their reach. Time was running out. The stakes were higher than ever before. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Elon realized that this wasn't just a scientific race. It was a race for humanity's survival. The next few days passed in a blur of constant updates, emergency meetings, and urgent phone calls. The world's leading experts were being called in, biologists, epidemiologists, and environmental scientists all working together, but the reality was starting to settle in. There was still so much that they didn't understand about the fungus, and the race to uncover the truth was on. Elon was determined that this wouldn't turn into another crisis left to fester. This was something he could help solve. In the early hours of the fourth day after the conference, Elon found himself back in the lab. A large map was pinned to the wall, dotted with red pins marking the locations of the confirmed outbreaks. The projections were grim. It wasn't just the animals in the wild that were dying. Now, there were reports of sudden, unexplained deaths of domesticated animals in regions far from the initial hot zones. Pets, farm animals, these were all showing signs of the disease. Let's take a closer look at this thing, Elon said, addressing Dr. Sarah Richardson, who was leading the research team at the lab. They had just received a set of samples from an outbreak near a small town in South America. The data had shown an alarming degree of mutation in the fungus. Sarah, who had been running tests and analyzing cultures of the fungus, walked over to a lab bench where the samples were stored under highly controlled conditions. We've been seeing unusual patterns. At first, the fungus appeared to be a standard pathogenic variety, growing in specific conditions on decaying organic material. But as the weeks went on, it started adapting rapidly. Elon leaned over to examine a microscope slide. The fungus, although a microscopic organism, had an eerie appearance, glistening spores clinging to a network of branching mycelium that appeared almost sentient in the way they seemed to stretch and grow with purpose. The samples from South America are different, Sarah continued, watching him closely. These specimens have begun to exhibit traits we haven't seen in fungi before. They're mutating faster than we thought possible. What do you mean by mutating? Elon asked, his brow furrowing. He knew enough about biology to understand the basics, but this was something different, a rapidly evolving pathogen that threatened to outpace any current understanding of disease. We've seen it shift its morphology, how it grows, Sarah explained. But the most concerning change is how it interacts with its host. It's no longer just infecting the animal's respiratory systems. It's altering their immune systems, making them more susceptible to other diseases. Can we predict its next mutation? Elon asked, frustration creeping into his voice. The uncertainty of it all was maddening. He had always believed in the power of science and technology to solve problems, but this felt like an enemy that refused to be understood. Sarah shook her head. Not yet. And that's what makes it so dangerous. We don't know how far it will go, or what kind of mutations it will exhibit next. What we do know is that the fungus is showing signs of adaptation to different animal species, ones that were previously immune to such infections. It's evolving with astonishing speed. Elon ran his fingers through his hair, a clear sign of his growing anxiety. He had been in high-stakes situations before, but this was different. This wasn't just about innovation or pushing a new product into the market. This was about survival. The fungus was acting as if it had its own intelligence, its own drive to survive. This isn't just a biological issue, Elon muttered to himself. It's evolving in a way that's impossible to predict. We need a strategy, and we need it fast. Exactly, Sarah said, her tone sharp but understanding. We need to treat this like a problem that's always one step ahead of us. We can't keep reacting. We need to stay proactive, anticipate where it's going next, and use everything we know about disease vectors, mutation, and biology to get ahead. Elon's mind was already working, mapping out the possibilities. He needed resources, data, and collaboration on a scale that no single research team could handle alone. This wasn't just a scientific problem, it was a global crisis. Governments, private sectors, and non-profit organizations all had to come together in this effort. It was the only way they'd have any chance of containing the fungus before it spread further. At that moment, Elon's phone buzzed. It was a message from his partner at Neuralink, Max Hodak. Elon, we're seeing neurological symptoms showing up in animals. Severe confusion, lack of coordination, strange behavior. Could this be connected to the fungal mutations? Elon felt a chill run down his spine. Neurological symptoms? That meant the fungus wasn't just attacking the body. It was reaching into the brain, possibly affecting cognitive function. This was the kind of horror story that existed only in science fiction. And yet, it was happening in real life. Sarah, Max is reporting neurological symptoms now. Could the fungus be affecting the brain? Elon asked, his voice taut. Sarah blinked, clearly startled by the new development. It's possible. Fungi can secrete toxins that affect the central nervous system, but it's rare. The symptoms Max is describing sound like they could be related to the fungal spores. If it's spreading into the nervous system, we may be dealing with something far more dangerous than we thought. Elon's eyes hardened. If the fungus could manipulate both the body and the brain, it would have even more catastrophic consequences than anyone had imagined. A disease that could change the behavior of its hosts. An organism capable of not only killing but controlling? They needed to contain this, immediately. Elon's next steps were clear. He would have to initiate global collaboration at an unprecedented scale. Governments, scientists, environmental groups, and technology companies had to work together to track the fungus, contain its spread, and eventually find a way to neutralize it. There was no room for individual agendas. This was a fight for the future of life on Earth. The situation was escalating quickly, and Elon realized that, for all his brilliance, he was at the mercy of a pathogen that was evolving faster than he could comprehend. It felt like he was trying to outsmart an invisible enemy, a silent force that, unless confronted, could turn everything humanity held dear into a distant memory. His next words were definitive, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. We can't waste time. Let's mobilize every team, every resource, and every piece of technology we have. We'll need a global task force. Get everyone we can on this. Sarah nodded resolutely, a fire lighting in her eyes. I'll start contacting the Global Research Network. We'll need all hands on deck. Elon's thoughts turned to the global implications of this fungus, how it could disrupt not only ecosystems but the very fabric of human society. He could already see the headlines, hear the whispers of panic spreading faster than the disease itself. But Elon wasn't one to panic. The bigger the problem, the harder he fought. And in this moment, he knew that the solution lay in collaboration, innovation, and sheer willpower. The battle had only just begun. As the world watched in anxious anticipation, the crisis began to escalate. The fungal outbreak, once confined to remote wildlife areas, had spread rapidly into populated regions, crossing borders and disrupting the balance of life. News reports from all corners of the globe detailed the ongoing destruction. Animals falling ill, ecosystems crumbling, and most troubling of all, the first reports of human infections. Elon Musk had long understood the power of technology to shape the future, but never had he been so acutely aware of how fragile that future truly was. The situation was shifting too fast for the traditional response systems to keep up. Scientists were working around the clock, governments were scrambling to take action, and businesses began making emergency plans. But the fungus, with its unprecedented adaptability, was far ahead of anyone's projections. In a private meeting at SpaceX headquarters, Elon and his team were confronted with the magnitude of the crisis. The data had become even more troubling in the past 48 hours. The fungus was no longer confined to just animals or ecosystems. It was starting to infiltrate agricultural regions. Crops were being infected, and reports of human cases were beginning to rise in areas where the disease had reached critical mass. Dr. Sarah Richardson, still working tirelessly in the lab, briefed Elon on the latest findings. Elon, she began, her voice taut with frustration. We've confirmed that the fungus is not only affecting animal hosts, but now we're seeing it in the food chain. It's contaminating crops in regions where the fungal spores are being carried by air or water. That means the entire agricultural industry is at risk. If it keeps spreading like this, it could lead to a global food crisis. Elon listened closely, his face unreadable. He knew that the loss of crops would not only cripple the global economy, but would push millions into food insecurity. The situation was evolving beyond anyone's control. And the human cases? Elon asked, his voice steady but his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. The news from Sarah was already chilling enough, but he needed more specifics. We're seeing early-stage infections in humans in affected regions, Sarah explained. So far, it's primarily respiratory symptoms, coughing, fever, difficulty breathing. But there's concern that it may progress further. If it enters the bloodstream, or worse, the nervous system like the animals we've studied, then we could be looking at a much larger-scale disaster. The room fell silent. Elon's eyes narrowed, absorbing the weight of the situation. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, but this was unlike anything he had faced before. It wasn't just about technology. This was a race against time to protect the very survival of humanity. We need a strategy to stop it from spreading further, Elon said, his voice resolute. And we need it now. Sarah, what's our best option for containment? Sarah hesitated. At this stage, we can't isolate it. We've tried to set up quarantine zones, but the fungus spreads so quickly, it's already outpaced our efforts. We're looking at a problem that's global, not regional. Our only hope at this point is finding a way to halt its mutation before it adapts completely to humans. Elon stood up abruptly, the gears in his mind turning faster than ever. His instincts kicked in, and he began outlining a plan. What we need is a multifaceted approach. First, we need to track the fungus in real time. The speed at which it's spreading is our biggest hurdle. If we can monitor its movement, we can get ahead of it before it crosses into new regions. Second, we need to work on a vaccine or treatment that can counteract its neurological and respiratory effects. I'm willing to bring in any company, any lab, that has the capability to help. Sarah nodded, her eyes widening at the scope of Elon's plan. You think you can get the resources needed for that? Elon met her gaze firmly. We don't have a choice. I'll leverage every connection, every resource, to ensure this gets done. He quickly pulled out his phone and made a call to his advisor, Larry Page. Larry, we need everything. Satellite data, the best biotech firms, research labs, the best virologists, geneticists, and environmental scientists. Get me global real-time data on the fungus and every bit of information you can find. We need to create a containment strategy and, more urgently, a way to stop its mutation. This is life or death, Larry. We need help, and we need it now. As he hung up, Elon looked around at his team. There was no time for doubts. This was no longer just an issue of technology, it was a global emergency. Every second counted. His next move was a calculated one. Elon knew that to win this battle, he would need to unite the world's best minds, not just in science and tech, but in leadership. He picked up the phone once again, calling the heads of governments, international organizations, and private sector leaders who had the power to act swiftly. A few hours later, he had set up a video conference with the leaders of the World Health Organization, the CDC, and representatives from the UN. They needed to form a coalition, a united front to tackle the crisis. The world could no longer afford to operate in silos. As Elon joined the video call, the faces of global leaders appeared on the screen. The air in the virtual room was thick with tension. Everyone knew this wasn't a typical meeting. It was a call to action. We have to act decisively, Elon began, his tone unwavering. This fungus is unlike anything we've faced before. It's already disrupted ecosystems, it's threatening the global food supply, and there are confirmed human infections. If we don't act now, we risk a global catastrophe. We need to combine resources, data, and scientific expertise to track, contain, and ultimately defeat this threat. One of the representatives from the WHO, Dr. Maria Hernandez, spoke up. Elon, we appreciate your urgency, but we're dealing with a rapidly evolving pathogen. The scale of this is unprecedented. Even if we deploy every resource, we don't have a proven way to stop it. We're not equipped for something of this magnitude. Elon looked directly at her, his gaze steady. I understand the risks, Dr. Hernandez, but I'm telling you, if we don't come together now, we will be fighting this on every front. We have the resources to change the course of this, but we need a unified, global response. Time is not on our side. The room fell silent. The world's leaders knew this wasn't an exaggeration. The only path forward was collaboration, and it had to happen immediately. We're all in, Dr. Hernandez said finally. Let's make this a global initiative. If we fail, it will be the end of ecosystems, food supplies, and possibly human lives. But if we succeed, we will have prevented a catastrophe unlike any other. The video call ended, and Elon turned back to his team. His mind was racing with possibilities, but in that moment, there was a flicker of hope. The world had heard the call, and for the first time, he felt like he might have a chance to turn the tide. The world had united under a single banner. The fungus was no longer a distant threat. It was a looming reality, and Elon Musk was leading the charge to find a solution. But despite the collective effort, the path ahead remained fraught with uncertainty. Time, as always, was their greatest enemy. Elon was in constant contact with global leaders, scientists, and biotech firms, each providing different pieces to the puzzle. But there was no easy answer. No magic bullet. Just more questions. The fungus' ability to mutate, adapt, and spread was unlike anything they had encountered before. The initial stages had been terrifying, but as the days passed, it became clear that the stakes were higher than anyone had anticipated. This was a battle on a global scale, and there were no guarantees. Dr. Sarah Richardson, who had become one of Elon's most trusted advisors in this effort, had been in the lab nonstop for the past few days, analyzing the ever-growing data. She had been focusing on two key elements: understanding the biology of the fungus and finding a potential method to stop its mutations. The research was slow, but there were glimmers of hope, tiny breakthroughs that kept them going. Elon sat at a conference table, his hands folded in front of him, looking out the large window of SpaceX headquarters. The sun was beginning to set, casting a deep orange glow across the sky. The world outside seemed so peaceful, so unaware of the impending storm that was brewing. But within the walls of the lab and the meeting rooms, the atmosphere was one of palpable tension. "We've narrowed it down," Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him back into the present. She entered the room, her face tired but determined. "We have a theory about the fungus. It seems to have a unique enzyme that's allowing it to adapt so quickly. This enzyme could be the key to stopping it." Elon's interest peaked immediately. "A unique enzyme? How does that help us?" Sarah paced around the room, thinking as she spoke. "Well, if we can isolate and block this enzyme, we might be able to stop the fungus from mutating. This could slow its spread and, potentially, give us time to develop a more permanent solution, something that could neutralize it entirely." Elon leaned forward, his mind racing. "Do we know where this enzyme comes from, or what triggers its production?" "That's where the challenge lies," Sarah said, stopping in front of the whiteboard where she had been mapping out the fungus behavior. "The enzyme seems to be activated by environmental factors: temperature, humidity, the presence of certain compounds in the soil and water. What we're seeing now is that as the fungus spreads, it's becoming more resilient to these environmental factors, meaning it's adjusting its enzyme production." Elon's fingers drummed lightly on the table as he thought through the implications. "So, the fungus is learning how to survive no matter the conditions. If we can't contain its spread, we need something that can attack its genetic core, right?" Sarah nodded. "Exactly. We need a way to either block the enzyme from working or create a substance that can target the gene sequence that controls it. But that's easier said than done. We don't have the infrastructure to do that kind of genetic editing on such a large scale. We're still a long way off from developing a solution." Elon stood up, frustration starting to bubble beneath his calm exterior. He had faced enormous challenges before, leading the charge in space exploration, revolutionizing transportation, building the future of energy, but this was different. This wasn't a challenge he could solve with innovation alone. This was a living, evolving organism that was fighting back, and the stakes were higher than ever. "We don't have time to wait for the research to catch up," Elon said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We need something actionable. Fast." As if on cue, a message from Larry Page flashed on Elon's phone. "Elon, we found something." Elon's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" he asked aloud, already scrolling through the text. "We've been working with the top geneticists and researchers. One of them thinks they've identified a potential compound that could bind to the enzyme and prevent it from activating. It's not a cure, but it could slow the spread of the fungus. The challenge is getting it to the right places before it mutates again." Elon's pulse quickened. This could be the breakthrough they needed, something to buy them time. He quickly responded to the message. "Get me the compound. We need to test it now, and get it into the hands of every scientist working on this." Within minutes, Elon was on a video call with the researchers who had identified the compound. They explained that it was a naturally occurring substance found in rare species of fungi and plants in isolated regions. This compound had shown potential in preliminary tests, but it was still untested on a wide scale. "We believe it can bind to the enzyme and render it inactive," one of the researchers explained. "But there's still a lot we don't know about its long-term effectiveness. It may not be a permanent solution, but it's our best shot right now." Elon nodded. "I'll fund the clinical trials. Get me the data as quickly as possible." As soon as the call ended, he turned to Sarah. "We need to act on this now. Get the compound to every lab, every facility that can test it. We need to be ready for a full-scale trial, and we need to be sure it works before we start distributing it." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'll make it happen. I'll coordinate with the biotech firms and research labs. We'll start the trials immediately." Elon looked out the window again, his mind racing. They had a potential solution, but it wasn't a cure. It was only a temporary stopgap. And even with this new lead, there was no telling how long it would take to fully develop a permanent treatment. The clock was ticking, and every day that passed meant more lives were at risk. But for the first time in days, there was a flicker of hope. The world was coming together. The experts were working around the clock, and, just maybe, they had found something that could slow the deadly fungus. Elon wasn't going to stop until they had a solution. Not for the world. Not for the future of humanity. This was only the beginning of the fight. The world was teetering on the brink. As news of the fungus continued to spread, so did the growing panic. What had begun as a localized crisis was now a global threat, and Elon Musk knew it would take more than just technological solutions to stop it. The entire world would need to come together: governments, businesses, research institutions, and individuals. Only through collaboration could they hope to overcome this unprecedented challenge. In the following weeks, Elon doubled down on his efforts, reaching out to key leaders around the world. He had assembled a coalition of nations, private organizations, and scientific communities under the banner of the Global Fungus Containment Initiative. It was a broad, ambitious plan, and Elon knew it would require coordination on a scale that had never been seen before. By now, scientists from all corners of the globe were working together. Researchers in Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Americas had all been tasked with understanding the fungus's biology and identifying potential treatments. The efforts were starting to bear fruit, with new data pouring in daily about its spread, its mutations, and potential ways to fight it. But the real challenge lay in the distribution of resources. A cure or a vaccine, if one was discovered, would need to be delivered quickly and efficiently across vast regions, many of which were already overwhelmed with the spread of the disease. Every step was crucial, every decision impactful. As the head of the initiative, Elon found himself balancing meetings with world leaders, the constant flow of scientific updates, and the technical challenges of managing a global response. It was exhausting, but he refused to back down. In a high-stakes meeting with the leaders of the US, Europe, and key Asian nations, Elon presented the next phase of the plan. The fungus was continuing to evolve at a rapid pace, and they needed to move beyond simply tracking its spread. It was clear now that its potential to mutate and adapt meant that a one-size-fits-all solution wouldn't work. They needed targeted interventions, fast action, and constant flexibility. "I've been talking to some of the best minds in genetics," Elon said, standing before the large screen in the conference room. We have to disrupt its ability to mutate. The enzyme we've identified is key, but we need to find ways to slow down its evolution. We also need rapid containment strategies in key regions where the fungus is advancing faster than we can track it. One of the European leaders, French President Émilie Dupont, leaned forward. How do we do that? The regions that are most vulnerable are the ones hardest to reach. In some areas, the fungus has already infected thousands of animals. We risk losing entire ecosystems, and if we're not careful, human populations will be next. Elon nodded. I'm aware of the gravity of the situation, but we have data now that shows we can isolate hotspots and slow the spread by focusing on key intervention points. The real question is how to deliver resources to these regions while preventing further mutations. Sarah Richardson had joined the meeting remotely from her lab and spoke up. We're developing a field testing mechanism for the compound that could prevent the enzyme from activating, but we need more than just a cure. We need immediate response teams in place, teams that can move in to control outbreaks before they spread beyond the containment zones. This means having the infrastructure to deploy resources quickly, as well as establishing emergency treatment centers. Elon turned to the assembled leaders. This can't be just a top-down initiative. We need local expertise on the ground, people who know their regions, their environments, and their communities. We're in this together, and it's going to take every person, every country, working in unison to stop the fungus from taking over. The discussions that followed were intense, but by the end of the meeting, the groundwork for the next phase of the plan had been laid. Teams would be dispatched immediately to the most affected regions, and the development of rapid response protocols for medical interventions would begin. Supply chains would be strengthened to deliver the necessary treatment compounds to isolated areas, and cutting-edge drone technology would be used to monitor the spread in real time. Every available resource was being put to use. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The world had mobilized in a way no one had anticipated. Governments declared states of emergency in regions most affected, and emergency healthcare systems were set up in countries that had seen the first human infections. The team of scientists working on the fungal disease identified new targets for intervention, including the identification of plants with natural properties that could serve as a defense against the fungus. Elon, meanwhile, had turned to his other companies for support. SpaceX's satellites were repurposed to track environmental data, helping map out the fungus's trajectory across the globe. Tesla, with its autonomous technology, was quickly adapting drones to deliver treatments and supplies to hard-to-reach areas. Neuralink, once focused solely on human cognition, was repurposed to develop remote sensors capable of detecting fungal spores in the environment and alerting local teams. Despite all the progress being made, there was still a lingering sense of uncertainty. Every solution seemed to offer hope, but none were permanent. And the fungus, ever adaptive, ever changing, was a relentless enemy. One evening, as Elon sat alone in his office, a message popped up on his screen from Dr. Sarah Richardson. She had just returned from a visit to one of the hardest-hit areas in South America. Her report was grim. Elon, we've confirmed that the fungus has mutated again. It's showing signs of adapting to the compounds we've been testing. The enzyme we thought was the key is now resistant to the initial treatments. We're back to square one. Elon stared at the message for a moment, feeling the weight of the news settle on his shoulders. The fungus was evolving faster than they could adapt. The compound, which had been their best hope, was no longer effective. It was like trying to outrun a storm that was always one step ahead. But as the initial sense of defeat began to creep in, Elon shook his head. He wasn't the type to give up, not when so much was on the line. This isn't the end, he muttered to himself, standing up and pacing around the room. He looked out the window again, the lights of the city twinkling below him. The world was in turmoil, yes, but there was always a way forward. He had faced impossible odds before, and he was going to face them again. Elon sat down at his desk, his fingers moving across the keyboard as he began to formulate the next phase of the plan. This battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. The fungus had adapted, but so would they. As the fungus continued its relentless spread, hope had begun to feel like a distant memory. The rapid mutations were outpacing every effort, and the world seemed to be trapped in a cycle of problem, response, failure, and then more problems. Yet, in the midst of this growing chaos, there was a singular truth that kept Elon Musk going. Setbacks didn't define success. Persistence did. The race against time had reached a critical juncture. It wasn't just the fungus that was the enemy now. It was also the fear and uncertainty that threatened to unravel the global unity that had been forged in the early days of the crisis. Nations were putting everything they had into the fight, but tensions were mounting. Resources were stretched thin, and the human cost was escalating. It was during one of these tense moments, when it felt like all hope might be lost, that the breakthrough came. Sarah Richardson, still at the forefront of the scientific team, had been working on a new approach that could potentially bypass the fungus's ability to adapt. She had been researching ancient forms of fungi and plants that had survived in extreme environments, isolated, remote, almost untouched by modern human development. These species had been evolving for millions of years, and Sarah believed they held the key to solving the mystery of the fungal disease. "I think I found it," Sarah's voice crackled through Elon's phone one evening, her tone urgent but with a hint of excitement. Elon, who had been drained by endless meetings and calls, perked up at the sound of her voice. "What do you mean? Found what?" "The answer. I've been researching fungi that have existed in extreme environments, places like caves and deep ocean beds. These organisms have developed complex biochemical processes that could help us stop the fungus from spreading. They've evolved to resist attacks from pathogens and environmental stressors in ways that most fungi haven't." Elon's heart began to race. "Are you saying we can isolate something in these fungi that will stop the disease?" "Exactly," Sarah said. "But it's not just about a cure. This would be a prevention mechanism. If we can introduce a compound derived from these ancient fungi, we might be able to shut down the mutation process entirely." Elon paused, considering her words. It sounded almost too good to be true. They had been through so many false starts, each one more devastating than the last. But something in Sarah's voice told him this was different. This time, they might actually be onto something. "How long will it take to get results?" Elon asked, his voice low with cautious optimism. "I can't say for sure," Sarah replied, "but I've already begun tests. We're going to know whether it works in the next few days. If it does, we'll need to scale up production fast." Elon didn't need more details. He could hear the urgency in her voice, and it was enough to convince him that this was their last chance. "Do everything you can to accelerate the process," he said, his voice firm. "Let's make this happen. I'll get the resources and teams ready." The next few days felt like the calm before the storm. The team worked tirelessly to refine the tests and confirm that the compound derived from the ancient fungi could indeed disrupt the mutation process. Elon, in turn, used every connection he had to ensure that the necessary resources were being mobilized around the globe. The biotech firms, the pharmaceutical companies, and even the military's logistics networks were enlisted to ensure that whatever solution they had would be distributed as quickly as possible. And then, one fateful morning, Elon received the news he had been waiting for. Sarah's voice echoed through the line, trembling with a mix of excitement and disbelief. "Elon, we did it. The compound worked. It stopped the enzyme from activating. It halted the mutation process. We have our solution." Elon's mind raced as the words sank in. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a real solution was within their grasp. But the sense of relief was short-lived. They still had to scale the compound production, distribute it to the affected regions, and, most importantly, stop the fungus from spreading further. But they had a weapon now, and that was everything. The next phase of the operation was a massive global undertaking. Teams from all over the world mobilized to get the compound into the hands of frontline workers. Drones were deployed to carry supplies to isolated regions. Military personnel assisted in setting up distribution points in high-risk areas. Medical teams worked around the clock, distributing the compound to the most vulnerable populations. Elon worked tirelessly, overseeing the operation from the helm. He remained in constant contact with Sarah, ensuring that the compound's distribution was being handled efficiently. But his mind never strayed too far from the larger picture. He knew that the fungus could still evolve. Even though they had slowed its spread, this was just one battle in a long war. There was no guarantee that the compound would work forever. Sarah's team was already moving ahead with plans for a more permanent solution. But in the meantime, they were doing everything they could to slow the fungus down, buying precious time for a long-term cure to be developed. Elon had learned that technology alone wouldn't solve every problem. Sometimes, it took humanity's will to overcome the most difficult challenges. This was the kind of battle where the collective strength of the world, of people working together, innovating, and fighting for survival, was the only way forward. A month later, as the fungus's spread slowed and the global death toll began to plateau, Elon took a moment to reflect. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they had weathered the first storm. The fungus was no longer a runaway wildfire, burning unchecked across the globe. Now, they had the tools, the strategy, and the unity to face it head-on. He stood on the rooftop of SpaceX headquarters, gazing out over the city as the sun began to set. For the first time in a long while, he felt a deep sense of resolve. The world wasn't just going to survive this crisis, they were going to come out stronger. And no matter what came next, Elon Musk would continue the fight. There was no stopping now. Even as the global response to the fungal outbreak stabilized, Elon Musk couldn't shake the feeling that they were only at the beginning of a much larger and more complex journey. While the compound derived from ancient fungi had brought hope and slowed the progress of the infection, he knew it was merely a temporary solution. The fungus was still out there, constantly evolving, waiting for another opportunity to strike. Months had passed since the breakthrough. In that time, scientists around the world had worked tirelessly to enhance the compound's effectiveness and develop other tools to fight back. But the pressure to find a permanent solution remained intense. As more data came in about the fungus' rapid adaptation, it became clear that they were not just dealing with a biological threat, they were confronting an entirely new kind of adversary, one that could outpace their technological innovations. One morning, Elon received a call from Dr. Sarah Richardson, the woman whose research had been pivotal in the discovery of the fungal compound. Her voice was filled with urgency. "Elon, we have a new development," she said, her tone a mix of excitement and apprehension. "We've discovered something in the fungus that we didn't account for before. It's evolving faster than we ever anticipated." Elon's stomach tightened. He had feared this day would come. "What do you mean? What's happening?" he asked, his mind racing. "The fungus. It's not just mutating anymore," Sarah explained. "It's developing a form of symbiosis with the environment around it. It's no longer just spreading through spores. It's integrating into soil, water, and even air. This is unlike anything we've seen. It's adapting in real time, not just to human interventions, but to every shift in the ecosystem." Elon's breath caught in his chest. This wasn't just a biological weapon. It was an ecosystem killer, capable of rewriting the rules of life itself. "Are you saying it's becoming part of the environment? That it's going to affect everything?" Elon asked, dread settling in. "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "And that's not the worst part. As it integrates with the environment, it becomes harder to detect. We can't just treat it with the same compounds we've used before. It's as if the fungus is becoming one with the earth itself." The implications of Sarah's words were staggering. The fungus had shifted from a mere pathogen into a pervasive force, capable of altering ecosystems on a global scale. It could no longer be contained by conventional methods. The fight was evolving, and so must their strategies. Elon took a deep breath and stood up from his desk, pacing around the room as he processed the information. This wasn't just about saving people anymore. This was about preserving the balance of life on Earth. "We need to shift our approach," Elon said, his voice resolute. "We've been thinking about this as a disease, something we can treat. But what if the fungus is more than that? What if it's part of something larger, something we need to understand in order to truly fight it?" Sarah was silent for a moment, then responded, "You might be right. If it's evolving into an integral part of the environment, we may need to rethink how we're interacting with the world around us. This isn't just a health crisis, it's an ecological one." Elon felt the weight of her words. He had never been one to shy away from challenges, but this was different. They were now facing something that defied the very laws of biology, something that was rewriting the relationship between living organisms and their environment. And in doing so, it was threatening to upend the balance of ecosystems everywhere. "We need to bring in the best ecological experts," environmental scientists, and biologists from around the world, Elon said, his mind working at full speed. We've been fighting the fungus as though it's a simple virus. But if it's becoming part of the ecosystem, we need to understand its new role. Sarah agreed. We're going to need a more holistic approach. A solution that doesn't just address the symptoms but targets the fungus at its core, integrating it into the very fabric of the planet. And so, Elon began assembling a new team of experts, people who could think beyond traditional scientific boundaries. He reached out to biologists who specialized in environmental balance, climate change experts who understood how fragile ecosystems were, and even ethnobotanists who had studied plant and fungal relationships for decades. The goal now wasn't just to stop the fungus, it was to understand it, to find a way to coexist with it, or at the very least, to integrate it into the environment in a way that wouldn't destroy life as they knew it. While this team of experts worked on finding answers, Elon's other companies, SpaceX, Tesla, and Neuralink, remained hard at work on technological solutions. SpaceX was researching new satellite technology that could detect fungal growth from space, mapping out areas where the fungus was infiltrating the environment. Tesla's energy solutions were being reworked to help power the global efforts for research and relief. And Neuralink's neural technology was being utilized in ways Elon never imagined, helping to map the fungus's neural connections, if it had any, in order to better understand its behavioral patterns. Weeks turned into months, and still, the fungus continued to evolve. The new team of experts had identified patterns, yet each time they thought they understood the fungus, it shifted again, adapting in ways that left them scrambling for answers. Then, one morning, a breakthrough came, unexpected, yet profound. One of the lead biologists, Dr. John Sims, stood up during a strategy meeting with Elon and Sarah. He was a soft-spoken man, but his words carried immense weight. "I think I've figured it out," Dr. Sims said, his voice tinged with excitement. "It's not just about the fungus adapting to the environment. It's about the environment adapting to the fungus. The fungi are altering their surroundings to better suit their survival needs. What we're seeing is an entire ecosystem shifting to accommodate the fungus, not the other way around." Elon stared at him, trying to comprehend the full magnitude of what was being said. "So, you're saying the fungus is creating a new kind of ecology?" Elon asked. "Yes," Dr. Sims nodded. "It's turning the environment into something that can sustain its growth. If we understand how this process works, we might be able to reverse engineer it. If the fungus is changing its surroundings, maybe we can do the opposite, create conditions that are hostile to its survival." Elon felt a flicker of hope. This was the first real opportunity they had to challenge the fungus on a level that wasn't simply reactive. They could turn the tables. "Get to work on this immediately," Elon said. "We're going to need all hands on deck." And so, the next phase of the fight began. One that would not only require understanding the fungus, but also fighting fire with fire, using the very principles of ecological adaptation against it. But as they all knew, nothing about this fight would be easy. The future of Earth hung in the balance. As Elon Musk and his team of experts dove deeper into understanding the fungus's new role in the ecosystem, the scale of the challenge grew ever more daunting. They weren't just battling a disease anymore. They were engaged in a war against nature itself. The fungus wasn't a simple organism. It was a force of nature, capable of reshaping the world in ways they hadn't even begun to fully comprehend. The task ahead was monumental: to find a way to counteract the fungus's ability to alter its surroundings. The question that dominated every conversation was this: how could they disrupt a process that nature itself had perfected over millions of years? Elon had always prided himself on finding solutions to seemingly impossible problems, but this time felt different. It wasn't just a technological issue. It was a fundamental clash between humanity's need to survive and the relentless power of an organism that was evolving faster than they could track. The first step in this new battle was to create conditions that would render the fungus's attempts at adaptation ineffective. If the fungus was changing its environment to suit its needs, the team reasoned, they could reverse the process. But that wasn't easy. The fungus had developed an intricate relationship with its surroundings, especially the soil, water, and air. It wasn't just surviving. It was thriving, manipulating its environment to create the perfect habitat for itself. Dr. Sarah Richardson, who had been the architect of their previous breakthroughs, was at the forefront of this new research. She worked day and night in her lab, running experiments on soil, water, and air conditions, trying to identify variables that could destabilize the fungus's ability to thrive. Meanwhile, other members of the team were looking into genetic modifications of both plants and fungi that could create natural barriers to the fungus's spread. One evening, Elon received a call from Sarah that would change everything. "Elon, we've been testing a theory, and it's working," Sarah said, breathless with excitement. "The fungus is highly sensitive to changes in the pH levels of its environment. If we can acidify the soil and water in its most critical habitats, we can halt its growth. But we need to move quickly before it spreads to more regions." Elon's pulse quickened. After months of research and setbacks, they were finally getting somewhere. "Are you sure this will work? Could it backfire?" Elon asked, his mind racing. "We've tested it in small, controlled environments, and it's proven to be effective," Sarah replied. "It's not a perfect solution, but it's a start. The key will be to target the fungus's core habitats, the areas where it's becoming most integrated into the ecosystem. If we can disrupt those areas, we can significantly slow its spread." Elon thought about it for a moment. It was a bold move, but if they could acidify the soil and water in critical areas, it might give them the time they needed to develop a more permanent solution. There was no time to waste. "Do it," Elon said, determination in his voice. "We'll mobilize the teams and resources to implement it as quickly as possible." As soon as the decision was made, the teams sprang into action. They sent out drones, equipped with specialized equipment to monitor pH levels in key regions, to assess the areas most affected by the fungus. In parallel, they began designing and manufacturing large-scale acidification systems that could be deployed to alter the soil and water in these critical areas. It was a high-risk strategy. Acidifying large portions of the environment was no small feat, and the unintended consequences could be catastrophic. But Elon knew that they had no choice. The fungus had grown too powerful, and the world couldn't afford to wait for a perfect solution. They had to act now. In the meantime, SpaceX provided the logistical backbone for the operation, using their satellite network to track the fungus's spread in real time and identify new hotspots. Tesla's advanced battery technology allowed for mobile acidification units to operate in even the most remote and challenging environments. Neuralink was even brought in to help develop algorithms that could predict the fungus's next move based on environmental factors, giving the teams an edge in their efforts to stay one step ahead. But even as the plan was set in motion, there was an underlying sense of tension in the air. They were taking drastic measures to stop the fungus, but no one knew if it would be enough. The world was watching, and with each passing day, the stakes got higher. The first test run of the acidification system took place in a remote rainforest region in South America, one of the earliest places where the fungus had integrated itself into the ecosystem. As drones flew overhead, releasing the acidification agents into the soil and water, scientists on the ground monitored the effects. The results were initially promising. Within hours of the release, the fungus began to exhibit signs of distress. It stopped spreading, and its growth slowed dramatically. Sarah's team was cautiously optimistic, but they knew that this was only the beginning. They needed to replicate the process in other regions, on a much larger scale, to see if the results held. But as the operation continued, something unexpected happened. The fungus began to fight back. It wasn't simply mutating. It was reacting in ways they hadn't anticipated. Within days, the affected ecosystems began to show signs of regrowth. New fungal strains, more resilient than the last, were emerging. The fungus was evolving yet again, faster than ever before. "We've underestimated its adaptability," Sarah said grimly, as she reviewed the data. "The acidification worked temporarily, but now we're seeing new strains that are even more resistant." Elon stared at the screen, his mind working furiously. This was the kind of development he had feared. Every time they thought they had a solution, the fungus found a way to adapt and evolve. But this time, they were going to have to do more than just fight the fungus. They had to think ahead, anticipate its next moves, and build a response system that could match its speed. "Elon, we need to rethink our entire approach," Sarah said, her voice tense. This isn't just about slowing it down anymore. We need to disrupt its entire ability to adapt. We need to go on the offensive before it gets too late. Elon's mind raced as he processed the new information. The fungus wasn't just evolving, it was learning, and it was learning faster than they could adapt. This wasn't a battle they could win with just one strategy. They needed an entire arsenal of solutions, a multifaceted approach that combined science, technology, and nature. If they were going to stop the fungus, they needed to outthink it at every turn. And with that, Elon made a decision. It was time to take the fight to the next level. As the global response to the fungal threat progressed, Elon Musk found himself faced with a dilemma that, though not uncommon in his career, felt particularly daunting this time. The fungus, once seen as a biological hazard, had become a living, breathing entity, evolving in ways that mimicked intelligence. This was no longer simply about stopping a pathogen. It was about outwitting something that was evolving faster than they could react. Conventional tactics weren't going to cut it anymore. Sitting in his office late one night, Elon stared out over the city, reflecting on his options. He had already pulled every string he could, mobilizing every company, every research facility, and every expert at his disposal. But the fungus had surpassed their ability to control it with traditional methods. It had begun to evolve alongside their efforts, anticipating their moves and adapting to counteract their strategies. What if the answer wasn't in fighting the fungus at all? What if the key to stopping it was in changing the very way they thought about it? Elon's mind began to race, the gears of innovation turning faster than ever before. He had always been someone who thought outside the box, who took risks others wouldn't dare. Maybe it was time for something truly unconventional. He needed to speak to Sarah. The next morning, Elon called Sarah Richardson into his office, the urgency in his voice unmistakable. "Sarah, we need to approach this problem from a different angle," he said, his tone sharp with determination. "We've been reacting to the fungus, but maybe we need to start thinking of it as part of a larger system, something that's beyond just biology. We need to understand how the fungus fits into the natural world, not just as a pathogen, but as a potential ally in restoring the balance of ecosystems." Sarah raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but also uncertain. "Are you suggesting we collaborate with the fungus?" she asked cautiously. Elon paused for a moment, considering her response. What if the fungus is playing a role that we don't fully understand? What if it's not inherently evil? It's disrupting the ecosystem, yes, but is it possible that it's filling a gap left by something else? What if we could use it to our advantage? Sarah looked skeptical, but she wasn't dismissing the idea outright. "You want to turn the fungus into a tool for ecological restoration? It's risky, Elon. We have no idea how it would react to such a shift." "I know, but we've tried everything else. Traditional methods haven't worked. If we treat the fungus like an adversary, it'll always stay one step ahead. But if we treat it as a part of the system, maybe we can find a way to harness it. We need to integrate it, understand it. Perhaps there's a way to coexist, or at least find a balance." Sarah leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "You're talking about using the fungus's own ability to adapt and evolve to our advantage? To essentially guide its growth in a direction that benefits the ecosystem, rather than destroying it?" "Yes," Elon said, his voice resolute. "I think that's the way forward. If we can control the way it evolves, we could potentially use it to help restore ecosystems, help balance out environmental damage caused by human activity." It was a radical idea. Sarah had her reservations, but she was also aware that nothing they had tried so far had worked long-term. Perhaps it was time to think less about containment and more about collaboration, if that was even possible with a pathogen that was outpacing human ingenuity. "Okay, let's assume you're right," Sarah said, taking a deep breath. "How do we even begin? We don't know how to control the fungus, let alone guide its evolution in a way that's beneficial to the environment." Elon smiled, a glint of excitement in his eyes. "That's where we need to start thinking like engineers. If we can't outsmart the fungus, we need to work with it. Let's look at it the way we would design a machine or a system. Understand its components, its inputs, and its outputs. Then, we can begin to manipulate it, just as we would any other system. We could use genetic engineering to create a strain that's beneficial to the ecosystem, or develop a way to communicate with it in a way that triggers certain responses. Sarah considered this for a moment, her eyes narrowing. That could work, but it would require us to take risks. It could backfire spectacularly. If we fail to control the fungus properly, it could become an even greater threat than before. That's true, Elon agreed. But we're already on the brink of losing the battle. We've got nothing left to lose. In the weeks that followed, Elon and Sarah assembled a team of biologists, genetic engineers, and environmental scientists to start the process of understanding the fungus from a systems perspective. They began researching ways to communicate with the fungus through genetic signals, environmental cues, and even chemical markers. The team worked around the clock, trying to decode the fungus's evolutionary blueprint and figure out how to guide its growth in a way that would help restore ecosystems ravaged by human activity and the fungus itself. Meanwhile, Elon called upon his companies for support. SpaceX sent out satellite teams to monitor the fungus's movement across the globe. Tesla ramped up their renewable energy technology to power the massive data analysis needed for the project. Neuralink's neural interfaces were repurposed to study how the fungus's neural-like network functioned and how it might be influenced by external stimuli. As the project moved forward, Elon faced the kind of pushback he was accustomed to. Many were skeptical of the new direction, especially the environmentalists who had originally called for a more traditional approach. They were wary of his unorthodox methods and feared that any misstep could lead to an irreversible catastrophe. Some even wondered if Elon's obsession with technology was blinding him to the true dangers of the fungus. But Elon was undeterred. He knew that time was running out. The fungus had already infiltrated vast areas of the planet, and there was little hope that traditional approaches would work in time. If they wanted to find a solution, they had to think outside the box, even if it meant facing the unknown. It wasn't long before the team began to see results. Using a combination of genetic engineering and advanced environmental techniques, they created a modified strain of the fungus, one that could interact with its surroundings in a controlled way. This new strain had the potential to accelerate soil regeneration, improve air quality, and even break down pollutants that had long been a problem in many ecosystems. They called it Fungus 2.0. The first tests were a cautious success. In controlled environments, the modified fungus began to grow in a way that was beneficial, enriching the soil and helping plant life flourish. The results were nothing short of extraordinary. It wasn't just a solution to the fungus, it was a step toward reversing some of the environmental damage humanity had inflicted on the planet. But it was far from a perfect solution. The team knew that this was just the beginning. They had created a new kind of fungus, one that could potentially change the course of the planet's future, but they had to ensure it didn't backfire. Elon, this could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for, Sarah said, looking at the data. But we have to proceed carefully. If we introduce this to the wild too soon, it could change the ecosystem in ways we can't predict. We'll proceed cautiously, Elon replied, but we've got to move forward. We don't have time to waste. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in months, Elon felt a glimmer of hope. He had always believed that technology could solve the world's most pressing problems. Now, more than ever, that belief was being put to the test. Would the world embrace this new path? Or would it prove to be another risk too great to take? As the teams worked to refine Fungus 2.0 and prepare for its release into the wild, Elon knew one thing for sure. This was the kind of challenge that defined history. The world was on the brink of something monumental. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? With the new strain of the fungus in hand, Elon Musk and his team faced a daunting decision: how to introduce their controversial solution to the world. The modified fungus, capable of enriching ecosystems and mitigating environmental damage, had the potential to change everything. Yet, the risks of its deployment were vast. One misstep could lead to a global ecological disaster. But time was running out. If they didn't act soon, the fungus they had been trying to defeat might continue to spread, altering ecosystems in irreversible ways. Elon knew they had to move quickly but responsibly. After careful deliberation, he decided to take the bold step of announcing their breakthrough on a global platform. There was no turning back now. The announcement came during a press conference held at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Elon, flanked by key members of his team, stood in front of a sea of cameras and journalists. Behind him was a giant screen that displayed a visual representation of the modified fungus, now known as Fungus 2.0. Ladies and gentlemen, Elon began, his voice steady but filled with conviction. Today, we stand on the brink of a new chapter in human and ecological history. What we have created is not just a solution to the crisis at hand, but a path forward to restore balance to the natural world. He paused for a moment, scanning the room, his gaze intense. The world is facing unprecedented challenges. Ecosystems are collapsing, biodiversity is disappearing, and the health of our planet is deteriorating. For years, we've attempted to address these problems with technology, conservation efforts, and policy changes, but we've often found ourselves reacting too late. The fungus we've been battling isn't just a threat. It's a symptom of a much larger problem. And now, we have the opportunity to use this same organism to restore balance to our planet. Elon's words echoed in the room, and the reporters sat in stunned silence. Few had expected such a bold statement, let alone a proposal that involved working with the very organism they had been trying to contain. The skepticism in the air was palpable, but so was the sense that this moment could be a turning point. He continued, "We've genetically engineered a strain of the fungus, Fungus 2.0, that can restore ecosystems, regenerate soil, and even break down pollutants. It's a living, breathing solution to some of the world's most pressing environmental issues. But we know that introducing it into the wild comes with risks. That's why we've spent countless hours testing it in controlled environments, ensuring that its benefits far outweigh any potential consequences. And we will continue to monitor its impact every step of the way." Elon turned to Sarah, who stood by his side. Dr. Sarah Richardson, our lead scientist, has been instrumental in developing this solution. Sarah, would you like to speak about the specifics of our approach? Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm yet passionate. Thank you, Elon. Over the past several months, our team has focused on understanding the fungus at a genetic level. We identified key properties that allow it to thrive in diverse environments and then modified its genes to enhance those properties in a way that would benefit ecosystems instead of disrupting them. Fungus 2.0 is designed to work symbiotically with the natural world, helping regenerate the soil, purify the air, and promote biodiversity. We believe that it can serve as a tool in ecological restoration efforts, particularly in areas severely affected by deforestation, pollution, and climate change. She glanced at Elon before continuing. We've made sure that Fungus 2.0 is adaptable and resilient, but also controllable. We've accounted for a wide range of variables, from soil composition to temperature, and we're implementing a monitoring system that will allow us to track its growth and spread in real time. As Sarah spoke, Elon could see the reactions in the crowd. Some were still skeptical, while others were beginning to understand the potential of what they had created. But the hard truth was that no matter how carefully they tested, there was always a chance that things could go wrong. The real test would come when they introduced Fungus 2.0 into the wild. In the following weeks, the world's media outlets picked up the story. Public opinion was divided. Environmentalists were cautiously optimistic, seeing the potential for ecological restoration but remaining wary of the unforeseen consequences. Meanwhile, others voiced concerns that manipulating nature, even for a noble cause, was dangerous and could lead to catastrophic unintended effects. But Elon had anticipated this backlash. He knew that the path forward wouldn't be smooth. In fact, it was going to be incredibly difficult. The team moved ahead with careful planning, putting their resources into the critical task of preparing for the first field trials. The first location chosen for deployment was an area in the Amazon rainforest, one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, but also one of the most endangered. The fungal outbreak had spread through the region, leaving damaged soil and weakened plant life in its wake. If Fungus 2.0 could work here, it could prove to be the model for future restoration projects. Sarah led the operation on the ground, overseeing the release of the fungus into the affected areas. The plan was to introduce it gradually, allowing the team to closely monitor its progress. They had set up drones, satellites, and ground-based sensors to track every aspect of the environment: the temperature, humidity, soil pH, and even the fungal strain's growth patterns. Elon stayed in constant communication with Sarah and the team, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something could go wrong. What if Fungus 2.0 didn't behave as expected? What if it mutated or grew too aggressively? There were so many unknowns, and the weight of the decision was starting to feel unbearable. But as the weeks passed, the results began to show promise. The soil in the region began to show signs of recovery, and plant life that had previously struggled to grow began to thrive. The fungus was helping to break down pollutants in the soil and enriching the ground with vital nutrients. The trees and plants in the area were growing more vigorously, and wildlife began to return to the forest. It was as though the entire ecosystem was slowly coming back to life. But just when the team began to breathe a sigh of relief, something unexpected happened. The fungus began to evolve. "We're seeing new strains," Sarah said, her voice tense as she reviewed the data. "They're not behaving the way we expected. It's like the fungus is adapting to the environment in ways we haven't accounted for." Elon's heart sank. "What kind of adaptation are we talking about?" "It's hard to say," Sarah replied, "but we're seeing signs that the fungus is becoming more resilient. It's changing, and I'm not sure it's for the better." Elon felt a sense of déjà vu. It was the same pattern they had seen before, the fungus evolving faster than they could track. They had thought they were in control, but now they had to consider the possibility that they weren't. "Let's not panic just yet," Elon said, trying to keep his calm. "Monitor it closely. If we need to make adjustments, we'll do it. We're not out of options yet." But deep down, Elon knew that this was just the beginning. If Fungus 2.0 had begun to evolve in ways they didn't anticipate, it could mean that their plan was far from foolproof. The path to restoring balance had never been more uncertain. The discovery that Fungus 2.0 was evolving in unpredictable ways sent shockwaves through the team. Elon, Sarah, and the others had assumed that by controlling the fungus's growth and monitoring it closely, they could keep it in check. But this new development was a stark reminder of the complexities of nature. The fungus, it seemed, wasn't playing by their rules. Sarah sat in her makeshift lab, surrounded by monitors displaying data from the Amazon rainforest. The readings were alarming. What had started as a hopeful sign of ecological recovery was now being overshadowed by a troubling mutation in the fungus. It wasn't just adapting, it was accelerating in ways they hadn't prepared for. The changes were subtle at first, but they had quickly escalated. "We're seeing new strains," Sarah muttered to herself, running her fingers through her hair. "The growth rate is faster than expected, and the chemical composition of the soil is starting to shift." Elon, ever the optimist, was quick to arrive at a solution. "We need to keep the focus on the bigger picture. Yes, the fungus is evolving faster than we anticipated, but that's just the nature of the beast, isn't it? We knew this could happen." Sarah, however, wasn't so easily convinced. "I agree, Elon, but we can't ignore the fact that it's evolving in ways we didn't plan for. It's becoming more resistant to the control measures we've put in place. What if it turns on us?" Elon paced back and forth, his mind racing. He knew Sarah was right. This wasn't just a small hiccup. The fungus had begun to exhibit behaviors that weren't just reactive. They were almost strategic. The genetic modifications they had made were intended to push the fungus in a helpful direction, but now, it seemed the fungus had begun to rewrite its own rules. "We have to adapt," Elon said, his voice hardening with resolve. "Let's focus on gathering more data. We can still work with this, find a way to guide its evolution in a way that benefits the ecosystem without it getting out of control." Sarah looked at him, trying to gauge if his confidence was masking a deeper concern. What if it's too late to guide its evolution? What if we've set something loose that we can't control? Elon's expression softened for a moment. "We won't know unless we keep pushing forward. We can't afford to retreat. We need to stay ahead of it. Let's be the ones to shape this, not the fungus." Despite his confidence, deep inside, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a very thin line. This fungus, once a potential savior, could quickly become the villain of the story. The world was watching, and failure was not an option. As the weeks passed, the team continued to monitor the fungus in the Amazon. Satellite images showed rapid expansion, but with a strange twist. The fungus was now starting to form complex networks beneath the soil, almost like it was building an underground system that defied their understanding of its behavior. It wasn't just a fungus anymore. It was becoming something more. "We're seeing fungal tendrils form a connected network," Sarah said to Elon, showing him a series of images and data charts. "The fungus isn't just spreading in isolated patches anymore. It's creating a larger, interconnected system across the rainforest. It's like it's learning." Elon stood still for a moment, his mind racing to process the implications of this new development. "Learning? Are you suggesting it's becoming sentient in some way?" "I'm not sure yet," Sarah said, her voice cautious. "But this behavior is unlike anything we've seen before. It's no longer just reacting to its environment. It's manipulating it, shaping the land around it. This could be a game changer." The idea that a fungus, an organism they had considered to be little more than a simple pathogen, could evolve into a complex, self-organizing system sent a ripple of unease through the team. Was this evolution, or something far more advanced? And if the fungus could adapt this quickly, could it pose a threat beyond their control? Elon convened a meeting with his top advisors and the global scientific community. The weight of the decision was heavy on his shoulders as he prepared to make the next call. The world was on the edge of its seat, waiting for an update on the success of Fungus 2.0. The recovery of the Amazon was an unprecedented achievement, but this new twist, this unpredictable mutation, could change everything. The press conference was set, and as expected, the questions came fast and furious. Journalists were eager to know what had happened, and more importantly, whether Fungus 2.0 was still a viable solution for global ecological restoration. "Elon," a reporter from the New York Times asked, "can you tell us what's going on with Fungus 2.0? You mentioned that the fungus had begun to evolve rapidly. What does that mean for your project?" Elon stood at the podium, his face betraying none of the anxiety that gnawed at him. "What we've observed is that the fungus is evolving in ways we didn't predict. It's adapting more quickly than anticipated. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It means the fungus is finding ways to survive and thrive in the environment, which in theory could help restore ecosystems. What we're doing now is studying how to work with this new behavior and ensure it doesn't spiral out of control." Another journalist raised their hand. "But isn't there a risk that it could become uncontrollable? You've said that it's learning. Doesn't that make it dangerous?" Elon paused for a moment. He knew this was the pivotal question. "Yes, it's adapting. But that doesn't mean it's inherently dangerous. We've taken steps to understand its behavior, and we're developing new methods to monitor and manage it. Our goal is still the same: to use Fungus 2.0 as a tool for ecological restoration. We are committed to ensuring that it works for the environment, not against it." His words were met with mixed reactions. Some journalists nodded in cautious approval, while others remained skeptical. But the message was clear. Elon was betting everything on Fungus 2.0. Back at the lab, Sarah's team worked tirelessly to understand the evolving fungus. They introduced new environmental variables to see how it responded, and slowly, they began to uncover some of the mechanics behind its accelerated evolution. The fungus was indeed learning from its environment, but more importantly, it was responding to the very forces it had once been a part of. The patterns were subtle, but it became clear that the fungus was acting as a self-correcting organism, almost like it was trying to balance out the damage caused by human interference. "It's not just surviving," Sarah remarked, watching the fungus grow under new environmental conditions. "It's trying to heal itself. Maybe it's not as much of a threat as we thought." Elon, however, was far from convinced. "It's evolving too fast. We need to control the pace of this, or it could run away from us. Let's not get too comfortable yet. Keep pushing the boundaries of our understanding." As the fungus continued to evolve, so did their strategy. The team wasn't backing down, but every new mutation was a reminder of the fine line they were walking. The pace of discovery was accelerating, too quickly for comfort. With each passing day, the modified fungus, Fungus 2.0, was evolving in ways Elon and Sarah's team couldn't have predicted. What had once seemed like a solution to a global ecological crisis was now teetering on the edge of something far more dangerous. But Elon knew one thing: they couldn't stop now. The stakes were too high. As they continued to monitor the fungus's behavior, the results became increasingly unsettling. In the weeks since the initial trials in the Amazon, new strains had been emerging faster than they could track. And it wasn't just the speed of evolution that had them worried. It was the direction it seemed to be heading. The fungus wasn't just restoring ecosystems. It was beginning to change the very dynamics of the environment in ways that weren't entirely beneficial. "We have a real problem on our hands," Sarah said, pacing back and forth in the lab. She was surrounded by data on the fungus's rapid evolution, its growing network beneath the soil, and its increasing complexity. It's not just repairing ecosystems anymore. It's reshaping them, almost as if it's creating its own version of balance. But who's to say that balance will look the way we want it to? Elon stood by the massive screen in the lab, his eyes glued to the shifting patterns on the monitor. He could see it too. The fungus was no longer simply a helper. It was becoming an entity unto itself, adapting at such a rate that the environmental shifts were beyond their ability to predict. "We need to understand it better," Elon said, though his voice was tinged with concern. "Get more data. We have to stay ahead of this thing." But even as he said the words, a sinking feeling lingered in his gut. They had crossed a line. The carefully controlled experiment had now become a global, irreversible event. The fungus was no longer something they could control with precision. It was a living force, expanding into territories they hadn't planned for, altering the landscape, literally and figuratively. The next phase of the project involved sending more teams into the field, this time to monitor the fungus in different biomes beyond the Amazon. The hope was that spreading the fungus into new regions would allow them to better understand how it was interacting with various ecosystems. But deep down, Elon had his doubts. He had seen this kind of situation before, when a seemingly good idea spirals into something unmanageable. "Let's focus on the African savanna," Sarah suggested one morning during a strategy meeting. "We know the soil conditions there are vastly different from the rainforest, so it will be a good test case for how Fungus 2.0 behaves in arid regions. If it works there, we could scale it globally. If not," she trailed off, but Elon understood the gravity of her words. If it didn't work in the savanna, they might be looking at an ecological catastrophe. But what choice did they have? There were millions of acres of land suffering from deforestation, soil depletion, and pollution, and the world was desperate for a solution. "Fine," Elon said, though his voice lacked its usual decisiveness. "We proceed with the savanna deployment, but I want a team of scientists on site at all times. We need to monitor this as closely as possible." As the teams began to deploy Fungus 2.0 in the savanna, Elon spent sleepless nights staring at data and reports. The first few weeks of deployment were promising. Soil quality began to improve in some areas, and new plant growth was visible in places where nothing had grown before. The team celebrated the initial successes, but Elon remained on edge. He knew that the true test would be when the fungus began to spread beyond the controlled zones they had established. And sure enough, within weeks, the fungus began to spread more rapidly than anyone had anticipated. The once arid soil was now showing signs of life, but there were unexpected consequences. The fungus was creating massive fungal growths on the surface, large enough to be seen from satellites. These growths seemed to interfere with the local flora and fauna in ways that no one had predicted. "We've got a situation," Sarah said urgently over a video call to Elon. "The fungus is creating these massive fungal islands, and the surrounding vegetation is being affected. We can't be sure if it's a positive or negative effect yet, but it's definitely spreading faster than we're comfortable with." Elon's mind raced as he processed the information. This wasn't just a matter of tweaking their approach. It was becoming clear that they had released something into the world that could no longer be controlled. "Is it killing other plants?" Elon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not exactly," Sarah replied, "but it's definitely inhibiting growth in certain areas. It's as if the fungus is trying to monopolize the ecosystem." Elon was silent for a moment. The vision of saving the planet through a single organism was beginning to feel like an illusion. They had crossed a threshold, and there was no turning back now. At the same time, word of Fungus 2.0's rapid spread reached the global community. Environmental groups and governments, already on edge about the success of the project, began to voice concerns. Some of the world's most respected scientists issued public statements warning about the unknown risks of releasing a genetically modified organism into the wild. Elon, you need to take control of this narrative, a prominent environmentalist from the UN urged during a private meeting. There's a growing fear that this fungus could endanger global food security, disrupt natural habitats, or worse, cause irreversible ecological damage. Elon felt the weight of their concerns, but he also knew they couldn't stop now. If they didn't find a way to fix things, the damage would be even worse. He could see the headlines forming already. Elon Musk's ecological disaster. I understand the risks, Elon said, his voice firm, but we can't stop. We've seen too much progress to turn back. What we need now is more collaboration, more monitoring, and more science. I'll do whatever it takes to ensure that we manage this correctly. But I won't walk away from what we started. As the weeks wore on, the fungus's reach expanded to other parts of the world, and the team worked furiously to understand its growing influence. They deployed drones to track its spread, installed sensors across continents, and worked tirelessly to adapt their approach. But it wasn't just the fungus that was evolving. So was the way they thought about the planet's ecosystems. We can't think of ecosystems as static anymore, Sarah said one evening, looking at the data with a contemplative expression. This fungus is challenging everything we know about ecological restoration. Maybe it's not about control. Maybe it's about letting nature take its course, even if that course doesn't align with what we think is right. Elon nodded slowly, realizing that Sarah was onto something. Maybe they had been too focused on control, too determined to force the planet to fit into their vision. The world didn't work that way, and neither did the fungus. As Elon sat alone in his office late that night, staring at the glowing screen in front of him, he felt a mixture of awe and trepidation. They were on the edge of something monumental, something that could either save or destroy the world. The path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain. The future of Fungus 2.0 and the world was now in their hands. The months following the deployment of Fungus 2.0 across various regions of the world were filled with uncertainty. What had started as a project to revive the world's ecosystems had quickly evolved into a global crisis. As the fungus spread, it wasn't just reshaping ecosystems. It was altering the very way humans thought about conservation, intervention, and their role in the natural world. Elon Musk sat at the head of an emergency global summit, his brow furrowed with a mix of concern and determination. Leaders, scientists, environmentalists, and corporate partners had gathered in response to the growing backlash against Fungus 2.0. While some hailed it as a revolutionary breakthrough in ecological restoration, others were beginning to warn that it could become an uncontrollable force, with consequences far beyond their comprehension. "Gentlemen, ladies," Elon began, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "We've pushed boundaries that no one thought possible. But I'm here today to acknowledge the very real concerns that have emerged. Our fungus is evolving faster than we ever anticipated. We've seen it take hold in environments we didn't plan for, and we must address its potential impact on the global ecosystem." The room was filled with murmurs as people shifted uncomfortably. The team had worked tirelessly to manage Fungus 2.0's spread, but now they were faced with an ecological puzzle far more complex than they could have imagined. A representative from the United Nations, Dr. Emily Thompson, stood up. "Elon, we need transparency and a full evaluation of the risks. The fungus is disrupting natural balances. It's choking out local plant species, changing soil chemistry, and, worst of all, some reports suggest it's impacting local animal populations. We can't keep pushing forward with the assumption that everything will work out." Elon felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He had believed in this project with everything he had. They had to make it work. "We can't just turn back now, Emily. We've invested too much, and the potential benefits are too great. Yes, we're facing challenges, but that's why we're all here. We need solutions, not just fear." "I agree with you, Elon," Sarah added, joining the conversation. She had been quiet for most of the meeting, but now her voice rang out, calm and measured. "We've made mistakes. We didn't anticipate this rapid evolution, and we've underestimated the fungus's potential to alter its environment in unforeseen ways. But abandoning it would be a mistake too. We need to take responsibility for what we've unleashed, not run away from it. Elon turned to Sarah, a grateful but anxious look in his eyes. He knew she was right. They couldn't afford to back down, not when the future of the planet was at stake. We need to form a task force, Elon continued, his voice gaining strength. We need to work with every major environmental group, every leading scientist, and every government on this planet to better understand what we're dealing with. We can't do this alone. This is a global problem, and it requires a global solution. Dr. Thompson gave a reluctant nod, but it was clear that skepticism still clouded her judgment. And what exactly does this solution look like, Elon? Because right now, the fungus is spreading faster than we can contain it. It's altering ecosystems in ways we can't reverse. Elon paused for a moment, considering her words. He knew the world was watching closely, and he couldn't afford to fail. But failure seemed like a growing possibility. We are taking every precaution, Elon said, his voice steady. We're monitoring the fungus's spread in real time, and we've implemented new control measures. We're also launching a global task force to investigate how we can mitigate the unexpected impacts and fine-tune the fungus's role in ecosystem restoration. It's not about stopping. It's about adapting to new realities. The summit continued for hours, with discussions ranging from the practical to the philosophical. The big question hung in the air. Was it too late to reverse the damage, or was this simply the beginning of a new phase in Earth's evolution? Meanwhile, back in the Amazon, Sarah's team was racing against time to gather more data on the fungus's long-term effects. The new strains had become even more unpredictable, and the fungus seemed to be entering a phase of rapid expansion, with thick networks of mycelium stretching across hundreds of miles. The effects on the land were mixed. In some areas, the fungus seemed to be encouraging new plant growth and restoring nutrients to the soil. In others, it was stifling local plant life, creating an ecosystem where only the fungus could thrive. "This isn't what we signed up for," Sarah said one evening, staring out at the dense forest from the research facility. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the forest floor. "The fungus is evolving faster than we can adapt. We're out of our depth." Her colleague, Dr. Jose Martinez, looked up from his monitor. "It's not all bad, though. There's still hope. We're seeing some plant species return in areas where the soil was completely depleted. The problem is, we just don't know enough yet to make any conclusions." Sarah nodded, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. They had been hoping to fix the Earth's environmental problems, not create new ones. It felt like they were playing with fire, and now the flames were beginning to spread uncontrollably. "What if we can't control it?" she asked quietly. "What if the fungus is just too powerful? It could change everything. It might even make us obsolete." Dr. Martinez didn't answer right away. He just stared at the data, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He wasn't sure if the fungus could be stopped, or if it even should be. The world was changing, and whether they liked it or not, they were part of that change. Back at Tesla headquarters, Elon sat alone in his office, staring at the growing pile of reports. The world was increasingly divided over Fungus 2.0. Some hailed it as the salvation of the planet. Others feared it was an uncontrollable force that could rewrite the rules of nature in a way that humanity couldn't predict. Every day seemed to bring new discoveries, some promising, others deeply troubling. Elon rubbed his eyes, trying to think through the possibilities. He had always been one to take risks, but this felt different. They had introduced a life form into the wild that was rapidly becoming a part of the world's ecosystems. It was no longer just a tool to restore balance. It was changing the very nature of that balance. He picked up the phone and dialed Sarah. "We need to talk," he said when she picked up. "Is it time for Plan B?" Sarah asked, her voice weary. "I don't know if there is a Plan B anymore," Elon replied. "I think we've reached the point of no return. Whatever happens next, we'll have to face it together." As the global task force convened and the debate over Fungus 2.0 raged on, one thing became clear. The future of the planet was no longer in human hands alone. The fungus had become a force of nature, one that was forcing humanity to confront the limits of its power and its understanding of the planet it inhabited. The next steps would define the future of the Earth, and whether or not humanity would survive in the world it had helped to reshape. The summit had ended in a tense standoff. Elon Musk left the room with his mind whirling, overwhelmed by the pressure of managing a project that had evolved from a scientific breakthrough to a worldwide debate. What had once been a hopeful idea, using Fungus 2.0 to restore ecosystems, was now a global dilemma. And while some believed it was the salvation the planet needed, others saw it as a reckless experiment with irreversible consequences. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Back in the field, Sarah's team continued to track the fungus's rapid expansion. The soil samples, aerial surveys, and data they collected were coming in at an alarming rate, and each new discovery seemed to deepen the mystery surrounding Fungus 2.0. In the Amazon, the fungus had begun to show signs of not only restoring the soil, but actually creating entirely new microclimates. Areas that were once dry and barren were now experiencing an unnatural burst of rainfall, as if the fungus itself was altering the weather patterns. In other regions, plant species that hadn't been seen in centuries had begun to emerge. But for every success story, there was an unsettling counterpoint. Entire swaths of land were becoming dominated by the fungus, stifling other plant life and, in some cases, suffocating the indigenous flora that had existed for millennia. Entire ecosystems were at risk of being replaced by a single organism, Fungus 2.0. In a high-rise conference room in New York, the world's top environmental leaders gathered to discuss the growing crisis. The room was tense, with conflicting opinions on how to proceed. "Elon, your fungus is wreaking havoc," one climate scientist said, her voice shaking with frustration. "We were supposed to be helping the planet, but now we've created something far worse. The fungus is creating imbalances we can't predict. It's not just restoring ecosystems, it's becoming an invasive force." Elon, ever the visionary, sat in the center of the room, his face stoic but his mind racing. He knew the fungus was evolving beyond their control, but he refused to back down. The potential benefits were still too great to ignore. "We've been monitoring the situation closely," Elon said, his voice calm but firm. "Yes, there are challenges, but the fungus is showing us that nature doesn't operate in the neat, controlled systems we imagined. It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it's also offering us the chance to see the planet's ecosystems in a new light." Messy? Unpredictable? The environmentalist shook her head. "This is reckless, Elon. We're playing with forces we don't understand. We need to shut down the project before it spirals out of control." "Elon, please listen," another scientist added. "The fungus is spreading faster than we can handle. It's disrupting agriculture in places like India and Africa. The world can't afford this level of unpredictability." Elon's mind spun as he weighed their words. It was clear that not everyone shared his vision for Fungus 2.0, but despite their concerns, he still believed that this was the future. There was hope within the chaos. If they could learn to manage the fungus properly, it could transform agriculture, heal damaged ecosystems, and ultimately restore balance to the planet. "I'm not giving up," Elon said, standing from his chair and addressing the room. "This is bigger than us. We've only begun to scratch the surface of what Fungus 2.0 can do. If we halt the project now, we may never get another chance. But I'm not doing this alone. We need a global coalition of scientists, governments, and conservationists to work together. Only through collaboration will we find a solution." There was a heavy silence as the room processed his words, but there was no denying that Elon was resolute. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, and this was no different. As the global divide over Fungus 2.0 deepened, Sarah worked tirelessly in the Amazon to assess the environmental effects. Despite the growing skepticism, she remained committed to the idea that the fungus could be refined and adapted to coexist with natural systems. The data she was collecting was invaluable, but it was also clear that time was running out. The fungus was changing the region in ways no one had anticipated. Whole forests were becoming overrun by its growth, with massive fungal colonies covering the forest floor. Trees that once stood tall and proud were now smothered beneath layers of mycelium. Indigenous plant species were struggling to survive, their roots unable to compete with the invasive network of fungal growth. But there were also signs of hope. In some areas, Fungus 2.0 had begun to foster new plant growth, enriching the soil and encouraging the reemergence of species that had been wiped out by years of deforestation. The surrounding ecosystem was slowly beginning to adapt, forming a new kind of balance, albeit one that was radically different from what had existed before. Sarah stood on the edge of a clearing, watching as new plants sprouted from the ground, their leaves glistening in the early morning light. The fungus had made it possible, but at what cost? Would the world come to see this as a miracle, or as the beginning of an uncontrollable ecological disaster? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone buzzing in her pocket. It was a message from Elon. "We need to meet. I'm not backing down. This project is the future. Let's find a way to make it work." Sarah sighed as she typed her response. She understood his determination, but a part of her wondered if they were already too far gone. Could they truly control something as powerful as Fungus 2.0? Or had they unleashed something that the world was no longer prepared to handle? Back at Tesla headquarters, Elon paced around his office, running through plans and strategies for the future. He had always known that progress came with risks, but the opposition to Fungus 2.0 was more intense than he had anticipated. His phone buzzed with notifications, messages from concerned parties around the globe, and news articles both praising and condemning the project. In a rare moment of solitude, Elon allowed himself to reflect on what had led him to this point. He had always believed that the future was shaped by bold ideas, by taking risks that others weren't willing to take. But now, that philosophy was being tested in ways he couldn't have imagined. The fungus was more than just a scientific experiment. It was a symbol of everything he believed in, pushing the boundaries of what was possible to create a better world. But was this really progress? Or had they crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? As the global debate over Fungus 2.0 raged on, the future of the planet hung in the balance. Elon and Sarah knew that they couldn't afford to make a wrong move. The fungus was no longer just a project. It was a living, breathing force that was changing the world, whether they liked it or not. And as they prepared for the next phase of the mission, one thing was certain. They had reached a tipping point. The choices they made now would determine not just the future of Fungus 2.0, but the very future of the Earth itself. As the days stretched into weeks, the tension surrounding Fungus 2.0 continued to build. Elon's belief in the project, unwavering as always, began to create a rift not only among his allies, but within his own heart. Sarah, the voice of caution, worked tirelessly in the field to monitor the changes. But even her dedication wasn't enough to calm the growing concern. The fungus had become something beyond their control. Yet neither of them was ready to back down. The backlash was unlike anything Elon had faced before. As environmental disasters linked to Fungus 2.0 escalated, the world began to divide sharply. Governments scrambled to introduce emergency policies while environmental groups launched widespread campaigns, calling for the project to be shut down. The global media picked up on every new development, amplifying the fears that were beginning to spread like wildfire. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, there were still the quiet victories. Areas where the fungus had taken root were flourishing in new ways, transforming barren lands into thriving ecosystems. The fungus was doing what no human could have: restoring land, renewing biodiversity, revitalizing ecosystems that had been depleted for decades. But the cost was becoming impossible to ignore. Back in the Amazon, Sarah looked at the fungal network sprawling across the land. It was an awe-inspiring sight, something straight out of a science fiction novel. But behind the beauty of the sprawling mycelial webs, there was a deep concern in Sarah's heart. The balance of nature was shifting in ways that no one could predict. The very core of the rainforest, one of the most complex ecosystems on the planet, was now being redefined by this strange, alien organism. "We're crossing into uncharted territory," Sarah muttered to herself, staring at a satellite image on her tablet. The fungus had spread like wildfire, its tendrils reaching out in all directions, taking hold of the soil, enveloping the trees, and even disrupting the local climate. What was once a delicate balance of biodiversity was now dominated by a single organism. Her team had collected soil samples from different parts of the forest. In some regions, the fungus had brought life back into the soil, renewing the minerals and promoting plant growth. In other areas, it had completely smothered native plant life, leaving a wasteland of decaying roots and disrupted ecosystems. The fungus is evolving too quickly, Dr. Martinez, her colleague, said. What we're witnessing is beyond anything we imagined. It's like the fungus is rewriting the very rules of how ecosystems function. Sarah exhaled slowly. That's the problem. We thought we could control it, but it's becoming something we can't predict. In New York, Elon sat at a conference table, flanked by representatives from governments, scientific communities, and corporate stakeholders. The room was filled with palpable tension, everyone acutely aware of the stakes involved. We're at a crossroads, Elon began, his voice low but commanding. Fungus 2.0 has already changed ecosystems across the globe. We've seen it restore barren lands. We've seen it push the boundaries of what we thought possible. But we also see the risks. We've triggered a cascade of reactions that are outpacing our ability to manage them. A representative from the European Union spoke up. Elon, we're not talking about isolated incidents. We're seeing agricultural regions affected by this fungus. Crops are failing in places that depend on stable soil conditions. Communities are struggling with the aftereffects. We're witnessing an environmental disaster. Elon's face remained impassive. I agree. But the alternative, the loss of entire ecosystems, would be a disaster of its own. We need to think bigger. The fungus can't be turned off like a switch, but we can learn how to coexist with it. The room fell silent. No one knew how to respond. Was this really the future, an Earth dominated by Fungus 2.0? Or had they made a grave mistake that would take decades, even centuries, to reverse? Sarah found herself once again standing on the edge of a vast fungal field in the Amazon, watching as the network of mycelium stretched as far as the eye could see. The fungus was changing everything, rewriting the balance of nature in ways that seemed irreversible. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Elon. I need you to come back. We need you to help us lead the next phase. We can't solve this without you. Sarah paused, her finger hovering over the message. She knew what Elon was asking. He was asking her to help steer the project back on track, to find a way to make Fungus 2.0 work, to balance the chaos it had unleashed. She had always believed in the project, but now, she wasn't sure if they had crossed a line they couldn't come back from. But what if there's still a way to fix it? She thought. What if we can still find a way to coexist with the fungus? She typed a quick response, I'm coming. Back in the lab, Elon had gathered his top experts. They were now facing a world that was frantically searching for answers, and Elon knew that the future of Fungus 2.0 rested on their ability to manage the rapidly growing fungus. If they couldn't stabilize it, they might lose everything. We're no longer just managing a project, Elon said, his voice tense. This is a global emergency. We need to ensure that the fungus is contained, but also that its potential for ecological restoration is not squandered. If we can control its spread, we may have a chance to heal the Earth. If we can't, well, then we're in bigger trouble than we ever imagined. One of his scientists spoke up. We've learned so much from the early stages, but we need more data. We need to be able to predict how the fungus will behave in different environments, how it will interact with different species. It's no longer just about ecosystem restoration. It's about understanding the long-term consequences of introducing a life form like this. Elon clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. We have to move fast. The world is watching us. And if we don't solve this, we risk losing everything. As the weeks passed, the global divide over Fungus 2.0 only deepened. Some governments were pushing for an outright ban, calling the fungus an existential threat. Others were doubling down, believing that the fungus was the key to Earth's future. In the meantime, environmental disasters linked to the fungus spread across continents, with both successes and failures creating a complex web of mixed outcomes. Sarah arrived back in New York, greeted by Elon's team. She could sense the urgency in the air. It's worse than we thought, Elon said as they walked to a strategy room. We need to find a way to balance the fungus. It's not just about fixing it. It's about understanding it, working with it. The Earth is changing, and we need to adapt. Sarah nodded, feeling a strange sense of purpose wash over her. The stakes were higher than ever. It wasn't just a matter of saving a project. It was a matter of saving the planet itself. But as they sat down to devise a new plan, one question lingered in the back of Sarah's mind. Was it too late to control the chaos they had set into motion? Or had they already crossed the tipping point? The tension in the air was palpable as Elon and Sarah met in a small conference room within the heart of Tesla's headquarters. The world was watching, waiting for their next move. For weeks, the crisis surrounding Fungus 2.0 had only intensified, and it seemed like there was no end in sight. The stakes had reached a point where failure was no longer an option, yet the path forward seemed more uncertain than ever. Elon paced in front of a large map that outlined the global spread of the fungus. Red dots marked every region where Fungus 2.0 had taken root, and the numbers were staggering. What had started as a small-scale experiment was now a global phenomenon, both a blessing and a curse. The fungus was restoring ecosystems in some parts of the world, while wreaking havoc in others. "Sarah, we need a solution," Elon said, turning to her with an intensity in his eyes. "The data is clear. The fungus is adapting at an alarming rate. But so are we. We need to find a way to live with it, not just control it." Sarah stared at the map, her mind racing. She had been working on the fungus for months, and despite her reservations, she couldn't deny its potential. It was a force of nature, one that could restore entire ecosystems or obliterate them in the blink of an eye. But what if they could find a way to harness its power, to guide its evolution rather than fight against it? "Elon, I think we're missing something important," Sarah said, her voice quiet but resolute. "What if we stop trying to control it and start trying to understand it? What if we let the fungus evolve in its own way, but guide it gently, create a symbiotic relationship between it and the planet?" Elon raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Go on." Sarah leaned forward, tapping her fingers on the table. "We've been approaching this from a standpoint of manipulation. We've tried to control it, to impose our will on it. But what if, instead of making it fit our model of what ecosystems should look like, we allow it to evolve naturally? What if we adapt to it, not the other way around?" Elon absorbed her words, considering the idea. It was radical, to be sure, but it might just be the breakthrough they needed. "It would require a complete shift in mindset," Elon said slowly. "We'd need to completely rethink how we approach ecosystem restoration. It's not about domination, but cooperation." Sarah nodded. "Exactly. What if the fungus is telling us something about how we've been interacting with the Earth all along? Maybe we need to learn to coexist with the natural world, rather than trying to control it." The room was silent for a long moment as both of them processed the enormity of what Sarah had proposed. For so long, the focus had been on controlling the fungus, stopping its spread, containing its growth. But what if the solution wasn't control at all? What if the answer lay in collaboration? Elon looked at Sarah, a spark of understanding in his eyes. "This could work," he said quietly. "This could change everything." As Elon and Sarah began brainstorming ways to apply this new approach, the news cycle around Fungus 2.0 continued to spiral. Governments around the world were either accelerating their efforts to contain it or embracing it as the solution to environmental decay. Elon was forced to navigate an increasingly complex political landscape as world leaders demanded action and voiced their concerns. In some areas, the fungus was hailed as a miracle, transforming barren landscapes into thriving ecosystems. Deserts in the Middle East had seen the emergence of new plant life, while parts of sub-Saharan Africa were experiencing unprecedented vegetation growth. The fungus was providing a glimpse of hope in regions long ravaged by deforestation and desertification. But in other places, the fungus was wreaking havoc. In South America, entire forests were being choked out as the fungus expanded at an uncontrollable pace. The Amazon rainforest, once considered the lungs of the earth, was now being transformed into something entirely unrecognizable. Indigenous plant species were being replaced by fungal growth, leaving entire communities struggling to adapt. "Everywhere we look, there's a new crisis," Elon said, rubbing his forehead in frustration. "We can't keep up. We can't contain it. But we have to find a way to make it work." In the Amazon, Sarah's team continued to monitor the fungus's impact on the rainforest. The changes were both awe-inspiring and terrifying. In some areas, The fungus was creating new ecological niches, providing life to regions that had once been barren. But in other areas, the destruction was undeniable. Entire sections of the forest were being overwhelmed by fungal growth, as if the very land was being smothered under its weight. Sarah stood at the edge of one such area, watching as the fungus spread across the forest floor like an army marching forward. It was as though the fungus had claimed the land as its own, a silent but relentless force. Her phone buzzed with an incoming message from Elon. It was a video call request. "Sarah, I've been thinking," Elon said when she answered. "We need to take a different approach, one that integrates the fungus with the natural world, rather than fighting it. I want to try something bold." Sarah frowned. "Bold? What are you thinking?" "I'm calling it adaptive coexistence. We'll start by identifying areas where the fungus has already proven beneficial. Then, we'll begin the process of slowly introducing it to other areas, but in a controlled manner. Instead of letting it take over, we'll guide its growth by introducing beneficial companion species, plants, insects, animals that can live alongside it without being overwhelmed by it." Sarah was silent for a moment, processing Elon's words. It was a daring approach, one that could either revolutionize the way they interacted with the Earth or lead to utter failure. "It's risky," she said, her voice cautious. "But it's also the only way we can make this work. If we try to force the fungus into a mold it doesn't fit, we'll destroy everything. But if we let it adapt to its environment and evolve with it, maybe we can find a way to balance the scales." Elon nodded. "Exactly. I'm putting together a team to implement this. We need to start small and test the waters before we scale it up." The next several weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Elon, Sarah, and their teams worked around the clock to develop a strategy for introducing the fungus into new environments in a controlled, sustainable manner. They began by selecting areas where the fungus had already shown signs of positive growth, regions that had previously been too arid or nutrient-deprived to support most forms of life. These regions would serve as pilot projects for the new approach. But as the teams began implementing their plans, the situation in other parts of the world grew more dire. In parts of Asia and South America, entire agricultural regions were collapsing. Farmers were reporting widespread crop failures, and some governments were considering drastic measures to curb the fungus's spread. Back in New York, Elon sat alone in his office late one night, staring at the map once again. The fungus was spreading at an exponential rate, and with every new development, the world seemed to become more divided. But as he thought back on Sarah's words, something clicked. The solution wasn't about controlling nature, it was about working with it. The journey ahead would be long, and the challenges unimaginable. But for the first time in weeks, Elon felt a glimmer of hope. If they could harness the power of Fungus 2.0, not as a tool, but as a partner in healing the Earth, they might just be able to change the world. But there was still much work to be done. Time was running out. The world was holding its breath. Elon's new strategy of adaptive coexistence was being tested on a handful of sites, and while the results were promising, it was too early to declare success. As the weeks passed, the balance between hope and fear was razor-thin. Would this innovative approach be the breakthrough humanity desperately needed, or was it yet another misstep in a world already teetering on the edge? In the Amazon, Sarah's team was already in the trenches, deploying the new approach with meticulous care. Small-scale trials were underway in areas where the fungus had shown both destructive and restorative potential. They had selected patches of land that had seen minimal damage, hoping that the fungus could thrive without overpowering the delicate ecosystems surrounding it. But with every test came new challenges. It wasn't just about guiding the fungus growth anymore. It was about managing its interactions with the land and the species that called it home. Sarah stood on the forest's edge, looking at the small but growing patch of fungus. It was spreading, but this time, it was interacting more symbiotically with the surrounding plant life. Native species of flora were beginning to coexist with the fungus, enriching the soil in ways Sarah had never imagined. But there was still the nagging thought in the back of her mind. Was it enough? "Sarah," came a voice from behind. It was Dr. Martinez, one of her senior colleagues. His expression was grim as he approached, holding a data pad. "You need to see this." She turned to face him, already bracing herself. What's happening now? Take a look at the latest data. We've been monitoring the new fungal growth, and it's been growing almost too well. He tapped the screen, revealing the data. The fungus was spreading faster than they had predicted, its mycelium stretching beyond the controlled areas and into regions that they had deemed safe for the surrounding flora. It was already beginning to overlap with the local ecosystems. "This is bad," Sarah said, her voice tight. "We were supposed to keep it contained. If it spreads beyond these areas, it could be disastrous." Dr. Martinez nodded. "I agree. It seems the fungus has adapted faster than we thought. We may be looking at another runaway scenario." Meanwhile, back in New York, Elon had been working around the clock, trying to align the global political climate with his vision of adaptive coexistence. Leaders from around the world had begun to question his strategy. His own team was divided. Some scientists were cautiously optimistic about the fungus's potential, while others feared it was already too late to control its spread. At a United Nations summit on climate change, the debate was reaching a boiling point. Elon had been invited to speak on behalf of the global team, working with Fungus 2.0. As he stood before a room full of political leaders, environmentalists, and concerned citizens, he could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. "I know there's fear," Elon began, his voice firm yet compassionate. "The fungus is unpredictable. We didn't anticipate some of the challenges we're facing now. But I ask you to look beyond the immediate risks. This fungus has the potential to restore ecosystems, to reverse desertification, and to heal lands that have been destroyed for centuries. It's not perfect, but no solution ever is." A representative from the European Union shot up from her seat. "We're not here to gamble with the future of the planet, Mr. Musk. The fungus is spreading, threatening food security, threatening biodiversity. You're asking us to put the planet's future at risk on the promise of something we can't even control." The room fell silent. Elon felt the tension rising as he faced the hardest question yet. How could he convince the world to trust him? "We can't control the fungus, but we can guide it. We can learn from it. We can adapt our strategies. If we're going to survive, we need to work with nature, not against it. We've been trying to control ecosystems for centuries, and look where that's gotten us. Climate crises, mass extinctions. It's time we start thinking differently." The murmurs in the room grew louder. Some of the delegates looked uncertain, while others seemed convinced by his words. It was a gamble, but Elon had made his choice. Back in the Amazon, Sarah's team had begun the delicate work of intervention. They were planting companion species, new plants that could help balance the fungal growth and prevent it from overwhelming native ecosystems. They had to act quickly, as the fungus was already beginning to take root in surrounding areas, far beyond their original test sites. "Sarah, we've got a problem," Dr. Martinez said urgently, showing her the latest data. "The fungus isn't just interacting with the plants, it's now affecting the soil pH. It's making the environment less suitable for some of the native flora. If we don't act fast, we could lose entire sections of the forest." She stared at the data, feeling the weight of the situation crash down on her. They were so close, but was it enough? Was there still time? "We need to keep pushing forward," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "The fungus has the potential to change everything, but we need to work with it, not fight against it. Let's give it a chance, a controlled chance." Dr. Martinez nodded. "I agree, but we'll need to move faster. I'll get the team on the new interventions." Elon's strategy was gaining traction on the global stage, but it was still a hard sell. In regions affected by the fungus, farmers and local communities were growing increasingly hostile. Agricultural systems were breaking down, and many were blaming the fungus for their losses. Protesters gathered outside government buildings, demanding that the fungus be eradicated before it destroyed everything. At the same time, communities in areas where the fungus was showing positive effects, the arid deserts of Africa, the dry plains of Australia, were beginning to rally behind Elon's plan. They had seen firsthand how the fungus was transforming the land, turning barren soil into fertile ground. The world was split in two: those who saw the fungus as a threat and those who saw it as salvation. But amidst the chaos, Elon's belief in the project only grew stronger. He knew that if they could succeed in guiding the fungus, they could help restore ecosystems on a scale humanity had never dreamed of. But the cost was becoming higher by the day. Sarah received another message from Elon, this time a voice note. Sarah, I'm with you on this. I believe in what you're doing. Keep pushing. We're in this together. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude wash over her, but it was tempered with a deep sense of responsibility. She wasn't just working to save the fungus. She was working to save the planet. Every decision, every move they made, would affect the future of humanity. As she looked out over the Amazon rainforest, watching the fungal network continue to grow and shift, Sarah knew one thing. The next few months would define everything. There would be no going back. The balance they were trying to create was fragile, but if they could maintain it, they could unlock a future where humanity and the planet could heal together. The weeks following Elon's speech at the United Nations were a whirlwind of mixed reactions. As the world debated the future of Fungus 2.0, public opinion continued to splinter. Some celebrated the potential for a global ecological reset, while others feared the fungus was an uncontrollable monster. The divide was growing, and Elon knew that time was running out for them to prove their vision was the right one. In the Amazon, Sarah and her team worked tirelessly to manage the growing fungal growth. Despite their best efforts, the fungus was spreading faster than they could anticipate. While some areas were beginning to show signs of recovery, others were becoming overwhelmed by the mycelial network, choking out native species in a slow, creeping advance. The balance they were trying to create seemed to be slipping through their fingers. Sarah, we have a problem, Dr. Martinez said, his voice strained as he approached her one evening. His face was pale with worry, and his normally calm demeanor was cracking. We've lost control of one of the test areas. The fungus has overtaken a key zone in the western quadrant, and nothing we've done can stop it. The native species are dying off at an alarming rate. Sarah looked at the data pad in his hands, the numbers stark and unrelenting. It wasn't just a localized issue. The fungal growth was accelerating and starting to push deeper into areas they had hoped to protect. Their carefully controlled experiment was beginning to unravel. I knew this might happen, but I didn't expect it so soon, Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The gravity of the situation settled around her, suffocating. We can't give up now, though. We need to adjust the approach. Fast. Dr. Martinez sighed heavily. I don't know if there's enough time left for that. We need more resources, more teams, more coordination. If we don't act quickly, this could endanger the entire ecosystem. Sarah looked out over the lush landscape, the vibrant green canopy now overshadowed by the creeping tendrils of fungus. Her heart raced as she realized that they were on the precipice of something far bigger than they could have imagined. They weren't just fighting against an invasive species. They were facing an existential crisis. One wrong move, and they could lose everything. Back in New York, Elon sat in his office, surrounded by data streams, news reports, and updates from the field. The tension was unbearable. Reports from Sarah's team were grim, and the international pressure to make a decision was mounting. Leaders from around the world were demanding more control over the fungus, threatening to revoke their support if progress wasn't seen soon. One of Elon's closest advisors, Ingrid, walked in with a concerned look on her face. Elon, we need to talk about the fungus strategy. The pressure is increasing from all sides. Governments are scrambling to take action, and they want answers. They want something tangible, not theories. Elon leaned back in his chair, his eyes weary but resolute. I know, but I can't promise them results right now. What we're doing is new, uncharted. This is about finding balance with nature, not forcing a quick fix. If we try to rush this, we risk everything. Ingrid's face softened with understanding, but the weight of the situation was clear. Elon, you know as well as I do that the window for this kind of innovation is narrow. People want to see change. If we don't provide it soon, the political fallout could be catastrophic. The fungus is becoming a lightning rod for controversy. We might lose the support we need to move forward. Elon stood up, his mind racing as he processed Ingrid's words. The implications were enormous. They were no longer just fighting to control the fungus. They were fighting to keep the trust of the global community, to prove that their vision of coexistence wasn't just a pipe dream. I've been thinking about it, Elon said, his voice calm but tinged with urgency. We can't control nature, but we can guide it. But we need something radical to prove that we're right, to shift the narrative in our favor. We'll need to go bigger. I'm talking about scaling our intervention, getting ahead of the crisis before it spirals further. Ingrid raised an eyebrow. You mean? Elon nodded. We launch a full-scale intervention in the regions where the fungus has shown the most promise, places like Africa and Australia. We'll build sustainable ecosystems around the fungus, introduce companion species, and showcase the positive impact it can have on biodiversity. We'll make the case that we are not fighting the fungus. We are harnessing its potential to heal the planet. The success stories will drive public opinion. Ingrid hesitated for a moment, weighing the decision. That's bold, Elon. But it could backfire. If it goes wrong? If it goes wrong, we'll adjust, Elon interjected, his gaze unwavering. We're not afraid to fail, but we can't afford to wait for the perfect solution. We need to take the leap. As the global clock ticked down, Elon's plan was put into motion. Teams of scientists, environmentalists, and agricultural specialists were dispatched to the regions where the fungus had shown promise. Large-scale intervention was underway. In Africa, teams worked with local farmers to introduce the fungus into degraded lands, transforming arid soil into fertile ground. In Australia, the fungus was being integrated into ecosystems that had been ravaged by wildfires and drought. The success stories began to pour in. In certain regions, crops were beginning to thrive again, and desertification was being reversed. What had once seemed like barren wastelands were now showing signs of new life. The fungus was doing what it had been designed to do: restore balance. However, the situation in the Amazon remained tense. Despite Sarah's best efforts, the fungus was still out of control in certain areas. It had spread beyond their carefully curated zones, creating havoc in parts of the rainforest. The mycelial network had become so vast that it was starting to interfere with the fundamental structure of the ecosystem. It was a delicate balance, and every day seemed to tip further toward chaos. In a heated meeting with her team, Sarah stood at the center of a room filled with data pads and maps, her face tense with frustration. "We need to act now," Sarah said, her voice sharp. "The fungus is growing exponentially. We can't let it spread any further without consequences. We need to contain it, but we also need to find a way to support it." Dr. Martinez, his face lined with exhaustion, raised his hand. "Containment is impossible at this point. The fungal network is too advanced. If we don't adapt our strategy to incorporate it into the environment, we risk losing it entirely." Sarah's mind raced. They were at a crossroads, facing the impossible choice between controlling the fungus and allowing it to integrate naturally. Every move they made now would determine the future of the planet. Back in the United States, as Elon's intervention programs gained momentum, the public debate reached its peak. Major news outlets, social media platforms, and activist groups were all discussing the fungus, its potential to save the Earth, and its dangers. Elon's message was clear. We are on the brink of a global environmental reset. This fungus is the key to healing our planet. We are not afraid to innovate, to take risks. Together, we will restore the balance between humanity and nature. But as the success stories mounted, so too did the skepticism. People began to wonder, was this too much too soon? Were they truly working with nature, or were they forcing their own ideals onto an uncontrollable force? The world was on the edge of a monumental shift. With Elon's bold intervention strategies in full swing, the results were starting to speak for themselves, but not without a growing sense of uncertainty hanging over everything. While some regions had experienced miraculous recoveries, the unpredictable spread of the fungus in the Amazon had cast a long shadow over their success. Sarah stood at the edge of the containment zone in the Amazon, watching the fungal growth creep into areas they had hoped to protect. The air was thick with tension, and the ever-present hum of the rainforest felt charged with unease. It was as though the entire ecosystem was holding its breath, waiting for something monumental to happen. Her team had been working day and night to adjust their methods, planting companion species and introducing more controlled environments for the fungus to spread. Yet, despite their best efforts, they were losing ground. The fungus was outpacing them, morphing and adapting with each passing day, forcing them to rethink their entire approach. "Sarah, you need to see this," Dr. Martinez called out to her, his voice tight with worry. She turned to him, her heart sinking at the look on his face. He handed her a tablet showing the latest data from their monitoring stations. The fungus had spread nearly 100 miles beyond the original containment areas, touching new and untapped parts of the rainforest. How did it spread so quickly? Sarah asked, her voice strained. We had the precautions in place. We were ready for this. Martinez shook his head. This wasn't supposed to happen. We need to call in more resources. This isn't just about managing the fungus anymore. It's about saving the ecosystem itself. Sarah felt the weight of the words. The more they tried to manage the fungus, the more they realized that they were losing control. It was growing exponentially, intertwining itself with the very fabric of the rainforest, changing the landscape in ways they didn't fully understand. The hope that had driven her team to this point was beginning to feel like a fragile illusion. Back in New York, Elon was in the midst of a critical meeting with his global team. The pressure from governments and environmental groups was mounting, and the media was relentlessly questioning whether they had gone too far with the fungus project. In some countries, entire agricultural sectors were facing collapse, while in others, new ecosystems were springing to life. We need a clear answer, Elon, Ingrid said, her tone sharp. The world is divided. Some are calling this a global ecological salvation, while others are calling it a disaster. We can't afford to lose any more credibility. Elon sat back, his gaze distant. I know, but we knew this would be a hard sell. Change always is. The fungus is a game changer, but it's also unpredictable. We need to keep pushing forward, and we need to show the world that this isn't just a series of isolated experiments. This is the future of the planet. His voice grew stronger, more determined. The fungus is doing what it was meant to do, restore balance. And yes, it's messy, it's complicated. But I believe that in the end, it will be the key to a thriving planet. Ingrid, though still skeptical, nodded. But what do we tell the world now? We can't ignore the fact that things are spiraling out of control in the Amazon. The fungus is threatening the very balance we're trying to achieve. Elon sighed, his mind racing through possibilities. We tell them the truth. We're in uncharted territory, and we're working tirelessly to figure it out. It's not going to be perfect, but the potential to heal the planet is still there. We're not giving up, not now. As the global community continued to grapple with the growing concerns, one thing became clear. The fate of the fungus project was inextricably tied to the fragile ecosystems in places like the Amazon. If they couldn't regain control there, the entire vision of coexistence would collapse. Elon and Sarah, though worlds apart, shared a singular goal: to find a way to make this work, no matter the cost. Sarah had a sleepless night, her mind spinning with ideas and solutions. But as dawn broke, an urgent message flashed across her screen. The fungus had begun to interfere with an entirely new section of the rainforest, one that had previously been untouched by its growth. This was it, the tipping point. If they didn't act now, the very heart of the Amazon could be lost. She called an emergency meeting with her team. We're running out of time, Sarah said, her voice tight with urgency. The fungus is expanding faster than we can manage. We need to create a new strategy, one that can scale across the continent and beyond. That's easier said than done, Dr. Martinez responded. The more we intervene, the more it seems to spiral out of control. What if we can't control it anymore? Then we stop thinking of it as something to control, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the pressure. We need to think of it as a new part of the ecosystem, something we work with, not against. It's not just about stopping the fungus. It's about finding a way to live alongside it. The team fell silent, processing her words. Sarah could see the weight of their dilemma reflected in their eyes. It was no longer just about saving the rainforest. It was about finding a new path forward for the entire world. In the global arena, the situation was coming to a head. As new reports of the fungus's spread flooded the news, public opinion was becoming more polarized. Social media was ablaze with heated debates, some calling for the immediate eradication of the fungus, while others demanded that the project be given more time. Politicians, too, were weighing in. The international community was divided, and many feared that the fungus could lead to a catastrophic collapse of local ecosystems. A group of environmental activists had even staged protests outside key government buildings, urging world leaders to halt all funding for the fungus initiative. Elon knew that the world was watching closely, and the stakes had never been higher. If he couldn't convince the global community to trust him now, the project, and his vision for a sustainable future, could be lost forever. Back in the Amazon, Sarah stood in front of a massive data map of the region, her finger tracing the intricate web of fungal growth that stretched out in every direction. "We can't let it take over," she whispered to herself. But then she remembered Elon's words. "We can't control nature, but we can guide it." It was time to take a leap of faith. Instead of containing the fungus, Sarah realized, they needed to learn from it, adapt it into the environment, and support the biodiversity that had managed to coexist with it. It wasn't about forcing a solution. It was about letting nature take its course, with human ingenuity helping to guide the process. "We need to scale this up," Sarah said, turning to her team with renewed resolve. "We need to let the fungus spread, but with purpose. We'll build systems around it, ecosystems that thrive with the fungus at their core. If we get it right, it won't just restore the rainforest. It will show the world how we can coexist with nature instead of trying to dominate it." It was the final day of the year. The world was holding its breath, watching, waiting. The fungus, once feared and misunderstood, had slowly transformed into something more than just an experiment. It had become a symbol of humanity's struggle to reclaim a sustainable future, a future where nature and technology could coexist, not as adversaries, but as partners. In the Amazon, the changes were unmistakable. The fungal growth, though still pervasive, had started to settle into a more harmonious pattern. Where the fungus once threatened to overrun everything in its path, it had now woven itself into the fabric of the rainforest, breathing new life into the soil, creating ecosystems that seemed almost magical in their balance. But it wasn't all success. There were still areas where the fungus had spread too quickly, areas where human intervention hadn't been able to control the imbalance. These were the scars of their journey, the lessons that would shape their future efforts. Sarah stood on a small observation platform overlooking the heart of the rainforest, her eyes scanning the vast landscape that stretched out before her. It wasn't perfect, but it was hopeful. The sky above was clear, and a cool breeze stirred the air. The ground below, though still scarred in places, was beginning to show signs of recovery. It was as though the forest itself was breathing again, taking in the changes and adapting. "Sarah," Dr. Martinez said, stepping up beside her, "we've done it. The balance is slowly shifting back. It's not easy, but I think we're finally getting somewhere." She nodded, but the weight of the journey still pressed down on her. "We're not there yet, but we're closer than we've ever been." Elon's voice crackled through her communication device. "Sarah, we've got a breakthrough," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "The data from Africa is in. The fungus is doing exactly what we hoped for. It's restoring ecosystems there faster than we anticipated. This could be the turning point we've been waiting for." A smile tugged at Sarah's lips as she glanced out at the horizon. They had started with nothing but an idea, an untested theory, and now they were witnessing the fruits of their labor. The fungus wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, not only in the Amazon but across the globe. "That's incredible," Sarah replied, her voice steady but laced with awe. "This is exactly what we needed." But she knew the journey wasn't over. As promising as these developments were, there was still so much left to be done. They needed to scale the successes they had found in Africa, the Amazon, and beyond. They had learned so much, but they had only begun to scratch the surface of what was possible. They needed to refine their approach, adjust it, and make sure they were building systems that could sustain themselves. In New York, the world had been watching as Elon Musk continued to push forward with his vision for a sustainable future. The public opinion, once divided, had slowly started to shift. Environmental groups that had once protested the fungus project now found themselves considering its potential. In global forums, government leaders were beginning to recognize that the fungus might be the key to solving some of the planet's most pressing ecological challenges. But even with the newfound support, Elon was cautious. He had always been driven by a sense of urgency, but now, more than ever, he knew that caution and patience were just as important. The fungus had the potential to change the world, but it also had the power to destabilize it if they weren't careful. Every decision, every step forward, would need to be measured against the potential consequences. Elon, Ingrid said, entering his office with a stack of reports in hand, we're starting to see the first signs of positive change. The fungus is working in more regions, and governments are beginning to embrace the potential it holds. People are starting to see it as a solution, not a threat. Elon leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the wall of data charts and maps that covered the room. I've always believed in the potential of this project, but we need to stay vigilant. This is just the beginning. We can't get complacent. The fungus may have found a foothold, but we still have to ensure that it remains in harmony with the ecosystems it's a part of. We need to keep learning, adapting. Ingrid nodded, understanding the weight of Elon's words. You're right, but it's a victory, nonetheless. The narrative has shifted, and people are beginning to see the fungus as an integral part of the solution. The next step will be critical, scaling the model, bringing it to new places. We need to show that it works on a global scale, that it's not just a regional fix. Agreed, Elon said, his eyes focused on the path ahead. We need to work with nature, not against it. The fungus is part of that. But we can't do it alone. We need to bring in more scientists, more experts, more voices. The next phase is all about collaboration. As Sarah and her team prepared for the next phase of their work in the Amazon, they found themselves reflecting on how far they had come. What had once been an impossible mission, combining cutting-edge technology with natural ecosystems, was now showing signs of real, tangible success. But with each success came new challenges. They were entering uncharted territory. Every experiment, every initiative, would need to be approached with the same level of caution and humility they had learned to embrace in the past months. The fungus was not a magic bullet. It was a tool, a powerful tool, but one that needed careful handling. In the end, Sarah knew that they had learned the most important lesson of all. Nature was not something to control. It was something to understand, to work with, to guide. The fungus was a testament to the incredible resilience of the planet, a reminder that life would always find a way to adapt. But it was also a reminder that humanity's future depended on their ability to adapt alongside it. As she watched the sun set over the rainforest, casting long shadows across the landscape, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. They weren't just scientists anymore. They were stewards of the earth, guardians of a delicate balance that could either save or destroy the world. For the first time in a long while, Sarah allowed herself to imagine a future where the earth wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. A future where the fungus, the forests, and the creatures that inhabited them were part of a new global ecosystem, one that humanity had helped restore, not ruin. And maybe, just maybe, they were on the brink of something truly transformative, a new dawn for the planet. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's the one thing you believe can change the world for the better? What's your vision of the future?